The Billionaire's Over 40 Love by Adrienne Kelly. A romancely.com story. Blurb. An over 40s, marriage and pregnancy, interracial, billionaire romance story. A messy breakup isn't going to stop 41-year-old Phaedra from living her life to the fullest. After all, she has a great job that she can continue to focus on. However, her resolve is shaken when she meets billionaire CEO Calvin Dennison. Calvin is not only strikingly handsome, but also disarmingly charming. And although Phaedra questions his motives, she finds herself drawn to him like a moth to a flame. But as their romance deepens, Phaedra struggles to keep up with Calvin's dazzling world. After all, is Calvin merely using his wealth to win her over? Or does he feel as strongly about her as she does him and want to start a family? Discover now in this BWWM Over 40s romance novel by Adrienne Kelly. Chapter 1. In her early days at Elite Boutique Atlanta, Phaedra would have looked up every time the bell at the front door rang out, but not anymore. She tried her best, but with the frequency of customers coming in and out of the store and their children, the bell grew monotonous, and she hardly noticed. Today was no different. She was occupied by a busy mother of 3 who was trying desperately to find her eldest son something to wear to a birthday party when he walked in. After sending the mother and son into the dressing room and occupying the other boys too with toy trucks placed strategically for that very purpose, Phaedra was finally able to look up at her next customer. He was tall, his blonde hair long enough to tug on but trimmed neatly in the right places. His white skin a total contrast to the chocolatey color of her own skin. He wore a charcoal gray suit that fit him in all of the right places. As a certified tailor and seamstress herself, she recognized a custom-made suit almost anywhere. He reeked of class and wealth, except for the tiny mismatched child attached to his arm. He was looking down at the girl as she tugged on his cuff. Okay. You can try it on, just wait a second, he said to her quietly, clearly not wanting to interrupt Phaedra. Noting that the boys were occupied, she stood from her crouched position and approached the two. Hi, welcome to Elite Boutique. I'm Phaedra, what can I help you with today? She spoke respectfully to the gentleman but glanced down at the girl with a big smile, only slightly intimidated by the handsome man in front of her. Phaedra was no stranger to attractive, wealthy men coming into the shop, but something about his green eyes stole the breath from her lungs. Pink, the girl exclaimed with a giggle. Ah, yes. The pink wonder in the window caught her eye as we were walking by, the words dripped effortlessly out of his mouth. Phaedra couldn't help but notice the split second that his eyes drifted down her own very pink and very form-fitting dress. She fought the urge to become self-conscious and put on her very best saleswoman face. Oh, she exclaimed. The pink one in the window? That's a beautiful dress, let's go check it out. She lightly grabbed the tiny girl's hand and led her towards the front of the store. They walked around 2 display racks before they came to one with rows of pink, frilly dresses hanging from them. On either side was a display of similar dresses, but of assorted colors and materials. Yay! Pink! This one. The little girl began tugging the one she had liked in the window. Okay, let's grab one in your size. Phaedra looked up at the man inquisitively, waiting for him to inform her of his daughter's dress size. An open turn of his mouth, a motion which normally would have irritated Phaedra on a whole other level, told her that he wasn't sure, and she smiled sweetly. Let me have a look. She bent down to the girl's level and took a few mental measurements before standing up and grabbing 2 of the same pink dress in varied sizes and indicating towards the back dressing room area. Ready to try it on? She asked the girl. The little jumping bean in front of her bounced towards the back of the shop while her guardian followed close behind Phaedra. Thank you, I appreciate it, he said. It's my pleasure. She wondered if she sounded too formal. He followed her to the back of the room where the boys were playing, their mother now out of the stall and straightening an absurdly small tuxedo in the mirror. Well, don't you look handsome? Phaedra said to the boy who grinned in response. She turned back to the man. Let's put her in here, sir. This was the awkward moment she rarely had in the case of solo shopping fathers, where someone needed to go in the dressing room and help the little one get her dress on. Almost as if he sensed the impending issue, he spoke. "Would you be able to help her try it on?" "I'm not good with all the lace and ruffles and hooks and all," he smiled nervously. "Of course, sir. Why don't you take a seat right there in the dad chair and we'll go try this on?" "Oh please, call me Cal and that's Ruby," he said nonchalantly as he slipped into the leather chair in front of the second dressing room door. The two disappeared behind the door, and Cal busied himself by looking around the shop, but stopped every once in a while to check on the two pairs of shoes peeking out from under the stall door. After 30 seconds of watching the boy to his left whack his little brother with the tie he had undone, the door creaked open and out walked two very pink figures. "Oh wow," he said dumbfounded, and for a second he wasn't sure which lady he was focused more on. Ruby looked like a huge piece of pink bubble gum that had been chewed a bunch of times and stuck together. The crinoline that started at her waist and moved to her knees seemed to defy gravity by the way it stuck straight out towards him. The best part was her bouncing ponytail, given that she could not stand still from excitement. "You look beautiful, baby girl." "Do you like it?" he asked Ruby as she bounded towards him. "I love it, Baba." "So pretty," she chittered as she climbed up on his lap. Phaedra smiled at the child's pet name for him. "I think your mom will love it too." He brought his attention back to the flawless brown legs that stood in front of him. The dress clung to every curve, accentuating the best ones. The lighting in the dressing area of the shop was slightly dimmed and the mirrors on each side as well as the back of each stall doors allowed for a simultaneous view of Phaedra's front, back and sides all from the leather chair in which he sat. Afraid she'd catch him staring, he quickly looked back to Ruby. "Want to get this one?" to which she was already nodding her head yes. He winked at Phaedra who smiled and led the girl back into the dressing room. When they came out of the room, Phaedra was carrying the pink dress and Ruby made a beeline for another display rack. Cal headed to chase after the girl, but thought the better of it. Why not spend a few extra minutes shopping around the store and enjoying his surroundings? "Why don't y'all keep looking around while I ring up this customer?" The other woman in the shop walked towards the counter, balancing 4 mini tuxedos and multiple tiny grooms. "Excuse me for 1 second, Phaedra said politely and moved to the counter. Cal followed Ruby around the shop for a few minutes, stopping here and there to check out something she liked. While Ruby loved pink, it wasn't her favorite color. She tended to change her mind weekly on her favorite, but typically something blue or green would catch her eye. She picked out a pair of blue and green striped leggings, a matching blue shirt, at least 4 more fluffy dresses and a peacoat even Cal was jealous of. His arms were piled high by the time the front doorbell rang and the only other customers left the shop. "Guess it's just us now," Cal said as Phaedra approached. "That's right, and you two have my undivided attention." Phaedra and Cal continued to lap around the store behind Ruby, who seemed to be taking charge. Every once in a while, she'd stop and start tugging on something and Phaedra would sort through to find the right size and hand it over to Cal to carry. "You've got a vast selection in here. We'll have to come back." Phaedra smiled and nodded. "Absolutely, we get new stock weekly, and we totally clear everything out for our seasonal items quarterly, so keep us in mind for the upcoming holidays. Maybe a little elf costume? Reindeer?" Cal chuckled, "She'd be a cute reindeer." "She's he was interrupted by a squeal at the nearest display rack. Ruby pulled off the brightest red dress Cal had ever seen, and upon Phaedra grabbing the right size, she ran directly to the back of the room. "I'll do it," Ruby said as she ran into the dressing room and shut the door behind her. The doors had adult height security latches, for this reason, meaning Ruby was not locked in the little room but nevertheless felt independent. "All right, well, we'll be right out here if you need anything," Phaedra said towards the door. She moved to sit in the matching leather chair next to the one Cal had sat back in. With both of them keeping a trained eye on the tiny feet below the door, the two chatted casually. "So, are you new in town? Or just never come this way?" "Well, to be honest, I'm usually not looking." I'm currently scoping out some real estate for a business front for my company, so I've had more reasons to drive down this avenue as opposed to some of the ones closer to my place. And I don't always have Ruby with me, so this was kind of a special occasion, but I'm glad we ended up here. Something in his eyes suggested that he was glad to be here for a different reason than he should be, but Phaedra wasn't sure. She couldn't tell if he was flirting with her or not, and if he was, she surely couldn't tell if he was married or in some type of relationship with the child's mother. Phaedra also began to realize how absurd it was to be decoding the man's life right in front of him. There wasn't a ring on his finger. A more aggressive single 41-year-old woman in Atlanta might bring up the fact he had no ring and spark up the conversation from there, but that wasn't Phaedra. Phaedra was mild-tempered for the most part and hardly felt her age. Most times she'd get asked for her age, she'd struggle to remember, having to start the math backwards from the year she was born. And each time the same result, 41. She wasn't ashamed of that number by any means. In fact, she took immense pride in what she had accomplished in the last 20 years. Unfortunately for the single men in Atlanta, Phaedra's progress hadn't sparked the confidence she needed to make a move, including towards the fit business owner, with no wedding ring, that stood in front of her. She settled on the idea that he was dating a single mother, and they weren't married yet. She was about to move on and back to the subject at hand when a red poof stumbled out of the room in front of her. "Oh, look at that," she said. Cal began to clap. "I like that. What's next?" Phaedra stood up and carried over the blue shirt and matching striped leggings for the girl to try. "Need my help?" "No. I'll get it," Ruby said before retreating behind the door. "So how long have you been here in Atlanta?" Cal asked her, resuming the small talk. "Oh, I've lived here my whole life. Out in the edge of town while I was growing up and went to college downtown and started working here a few years after that when it was just a few tables at a mall shop." "Oh, wow, really?" Cal said. He seemed genuinely interested. "Yeah, Candace the owner, you'll meet her. I'm sure she started the boutique in the early 90s, I guess. Back then it was just baby clothes, but then when the city started bringing in so much wealth and celebrities, she started forking over a lot of money to advertise to that crowd. Luxury children's apparel, she calls it." "Well, the name is fitting for sure. This is some great stuff. I don't consider myself an expert in women's apparel, but Ruby seems to love it. The real test will be if it lasts through Cosmic Brownies, Soda, and Hide and Go Seek." "Does your store guarantee those?" he asked with an obvious sarcastic smile on his face. Well, I'll have to check, but I don't believe so. Wait, did that suit come with those same guarantees? Would I have bought it otherwise?" The two laughed together as Ruby retreated again, this time in her blue and green get-up. "Oh, yeah, Rubes, you look awesome. What do you think?" "I love it. I want to wear it to school tomorrow." She sounded as if she was yelling every time she spoke because she seemed so excited about everything. Phaedra helped the girl back into the stall with the next dress in her hands, once again having the dressing room door shut in her face. "So, you said you were looking for a storefront for your business?" Phaedra remembered and asked, "What do you do exactly?" "I run a small media company, Queen's Media Group, and currently we've been working out of this warehouse facility, but it's not really customer-friendly. Apparently, ladies wearing stilettos don't like to step over piles of wires when they're looking for someone to do their advertising. But we do a lot of different work over there: advertising, tech management, networking. A few of my guys are big on building the next big thing in computers and tech. My goal is to turn the warehouse into our playground and let everyone have the space they need to work and get it as messy as they need it to be. And I'll have a few salespeople running the storefront, interacting with customers, and so on." "Wow, it sounds like you really have this all planned out." "Yeah, this has been a dream of mine for a while." Phaedra couldn't help but notice how his green eyes sparkled when he talked about what he was obviously passionate about. "When I was able to afford the warehouse, I thought I had made it big. We had a space to do it all. But we've been lucky enough to have some loyal customers and quality work come out of the last few years, so it looks like we've got the room and the funds to make an expansion. There's a small commercial space down a couple blocks from here, very similar layout to this place, that I've had my eye on. So who knows, you might be seeing a lot of me in the next few weeks. Phaedra could only hope. That's amazing. She fought the sweat beads that were threatening to break out across her face. Cal was determined and driven and seemed to really know what he wanted from his career. Actually, we're branching out as well. We're working with the bank to get an approval for a second location south of the city. We don't have it as well thought out as you, but we're definitely excited about it. That's great. Going from one store to two is tough, I hear, but after that they seem to multiply. Elite Boutique could be in the Carolinas before you know it. Phaedra found herself contemplating what he said, never ready to rule out anything. Maybe. Right now, it's just Candace and me. She's the owner, and I'm technically the manager, so there will be some changes coming towards us in the next few months. But I'm excited to take on the responsibility, definitely a more high-risk, high-reward deal, which I'm excited about. Absolutely, it's the only way to win in this city, I think. But hey, if you guys want to do some rebranding or advertising, you should give me a call. I'd love to help you out. She smiled and took the tiny white business card that he dug out of his pocket. Thanks, she said right as Ruby made her way out of the booth, wearing a black leather dress with metal tassels stood. Ruby was grinning, but the look on Cal's face almost ended Phaedra with laughter. No, he said next. Ruby retreated at his words. He turned to Phaedra with a puzzled look across his face that only stayed for a second before it twisted into a smile. I'm going to have my hands full with this one. As Ruby was trying on her last outfit, the door to the shop rang out, and this time Phaedra was almost shaken by surprise. She smiled at Cal and slid out of her seat, smoothing her dress as she moved towards the door. A woman with wavy brown hair was making her way slowly through the store, seeming to look for something in particular. Hi, welcome to Elite Boutique. Can I help you find something in particular? Phaedra asked sweetly. Yes, you can. A small child and a tall, dark and handsome type? Seen either of those? The woman asked. Phaedra chuckled nervously. Yes, Cal, she called over to him, realizing too late that she'd spoken too casually in front of this woman that would be his girlfriend or wife, but she didn't remember him mentioning a last name. Ratch, he said, not moving from his chair. Phaedra escorted the woman to the dressing area where Ruby was now dancing in front of Cal in her original outfit, surrounded by piles of the clothes she wanted. Oh geez, y'all wrecked the place, but can we hurry it up? I've got an appointment across town and Ruby's coming with me, she said in Cal's direction, but reached down to plant a kiss on Ruby's hair. Oh, we did some damage, that's for sure, and yeah, I think we're done here. Cal began picking up the dresses from the floor, clearly not able to remember which ones they had settled on keeping. I'll get those, don't worry. Phaedra rushed over, only grabbing the ones they were buying, and heading straight for the counter. Ruby and the woman stood a few yards away from the door while Cal pulled out his black and silver credit card and swiped it through the machine. Phaedra folded the clothes neatly into the two large white paper bags and ripped off his receipt before pushing everything across the counter towards Cal. You guys did well today, please come back and see us again soon. Maybe she was nervous at the newcomer, or afraid to cross some line in front of the woman, but Phaedra again resumed her formal business mentality, which she had ditched for the half an hour Ruby tried on dresses. Hey, thank you, Phaedra seriously. For the clothing tips and the conversation, I really enjoyed this, and I know Ruby did as well. We'll definitely be back. Before he had time to say anything else, Ruby had grabbed his hand and the woman's anxious voice rushed them all out of the store. Thank you, was all he was able to say on his way out. Phaedra stood in the empty store for a few moments, before registering all that she'd just experienced. She had enjoyed a perfect hour with the cutest 6-year-old and the most handsome and kind man she had met in a while. He was intelligent and funny but seemed, only by context clues, to be in some kind of relationship. Even if he wasn't, she knew there was little use in getting excited over a man she'd most likely never see again, so she shook it off and quickly busied herself preparing for the next customers. She almost hadn't noticed the quadruple-digit number that stayed plastered on the register screen at the counter, reading $1,249.90. She stared at it in the middle of stacking receipts. Had they really racked up that much and he hadn't blinked an eye? She wondered what it would be like to just swipe a card and pay for items without thinking. A sick feeling washed over her, and it was one she'd felt before, but maybe it hurt a little more given how down-to-earth Cal came off as. It was the feeling one got when they helped a customer who spent more in 1 hour at her store than she would on rent for the entire month, or sometimes even more than she would make in an entire month. But that was living and working in downtown Atlanta, and she knew it. But still, she couldn't shake the slight unease every time she glanced over at the neon letters. Chapter 2. Cal tried to focus on the voices on the other end of the conference call, but he couldn't. He was filled with thoughts of the beautiful woman he'd met at the kids' clothing store the day before. Would it be weird to go back there? Alone? The more he thought about it, the more it frustrated him. Why hadn't he asked her out or at least explained that Ruby wasn't his child? He hadn't really considered that she would think that until his sister questioned him after they left. "I saw you flirting with that cashier," she'd said later that day. He cocked an eyebrow at her. He didn't have a comeback, because she was right. He'd been flirting with Phaedra, and because somehow he felt a real connection with her, he found himself embarrassed and slightly vulnerable now that his sister was staring at him. "So did you ask her out?" "No, we were shopping for Ruby, and you practically dragged us out, so I didn't have much time." "Okay, but now, instead of making it clear that you are in fact single and interested, you look like a pervy dad." The look on her face was that of an annoyed sister who, despite her love for him, though he could be a complete idiot sometimes. "You think she thinks Ruby is my kid?" "Yes." The thought had crossed his mind for a moment, but he hadn't truly considered it. He'd been flirting with her, and he thought he'd made that obvious. But now concern pulsed through him. She probably thought he was some creepy dad who had a wife, but liked to flirt with other women. Great. He had a bad habit of not being in tune with other people, otherwise he would have thought to mention that Ruby was his niece and nothing more. But instead, he'd probably ruined what little chance he had to get her number if he ever saw her again. He wondered how soon it would be before Ruby wanted to go shopping again, and how quickly he could take her there without seeming obvious as to why he'd returned. A week? 2? He considered the idea. He'd spent too much money to return too quickly, and going to see her alone seemed like a dramatic step. The conference call should have been the highlight of his day. He presented his results from a new media campaign that used social media to share purchases and identify better prices on the market. The potential customers on the phone were from 2 very up-and-coming social media websites that were looking to use his tool to provide a service to their customers. It was a project he'd worked on for months, and it was now so close to fruition except for the fact he couldn't focus on anything other than Phaedra. Physically, she was everything. Her black skin was so beautiful and had been adorned perfectly with the pink dress that clung to her body. Her curves were tempting, and by the shape of her arms and legs it was clear that she took the time to take care of herself. Intellectually, she was a perfect match. Less than 2 hours together, and Calvin knew that she took pride in her job and the way she carried herself. She was exactly what he had imagined in the woman that would stand by his side. But could he just go back and talk to her? He considered the idea again, the chatter of his collaborators buzzing over the phone. If he tried to explain that Ruby wasn't his daughter, would it be too forward? Or maybe she'd think he was lying just to get a night with her. He knew he needed to proceed cautiously. Which also meant he'd think about it to death until he eventually became distracted by something else and forgot about her altogether. "Mr. Dennison," the voice on the other end of the line pulled him out of his own thoughts. He hoped they hadn't been calling his name for more than a second. "Ah, sorry." "Yes, I like where this is going, I really do." "Great, I think we'll need a few days to consult with our committee on the contract you sent us, but we're definitely looking forward to this arrangement." "Same here, we'll be in touch," the female voice replied. Excellent, thank you all for your time and I look forward to working with you both, and your teams, in the future. He let out a sigh as soon as he was confident the phone call was ended. He was excited about the project and the future of his relatively small company. His company was the perfect combination of web design and marketing, allowing them to have a much wider audience and reach a lot more people. The buzz of successfully delivering his speech had put him in a good mood, one that could only be disrupted by one person, Sophia. The phone buzzed. Yes? Cal pressed the button that communicated with his secretary. Cal, Sophia's here. She says you have a lunch appointment with her. He thought for a second before realizing he'd agreed to a working lunch with his ex-girlfriend and current business partner, Sophia. Sure. I'll be right out. He knew she'd be annoyed that he didn't invite her in. Queen's Media Group had moved to a back-half office in an 18-story building in downtown Atlanta. He, as CEO, had purposely placed Sophia's office on the far corner away from his. They'd been lovers before they were partners, dating throughout college. They formed the small company together after Sophia had refused to pursue job opportunities that didn't involve him. The company had started small, which Cal was fine with given his successful investments in the years immediately following college where he'd made most of his wealth. Once the company grew and Cal realized Sophia's desire for wealth and fame was incompatible with his personality, he'd broken it off, but agreed to allow her to keep working as a part of the company. Sophia hadn't taken the breakup well, and it took months for them to get back on speaking terms. There were months she'd tried to make him jealous, and recently she'd been actively pursuing him in an attempt to get him back. He'd only agreed to the working lunch because he needed to find a business front for the company, and he figured their lunch could take place in between two of the locations he'd narrowed it down to. He put his computer to sleep and grabbed his wallet and keys, sliding them into his jacket pocket. When he opened the door to his office, the tall blonde with too tan skin greeted him with an irritated smile. "What are you hiding in there?" she exclaimed. He had a policy about addressing her snide comments, a silence policy. "It's great to see you to sophomore ready," he said, ignoring her remark. She nodded in reply, her eyebrow permanently stuck up in the air. He walked them to the elevator where they rode in silence down to the lobby and outside where he hailed them a cab. They didn't need to taxi because the location was relatively close, but Cal knew Sophia and her Louis Vuitton heels would not last a second on the sidewalk, much less walking half a mile. "So, how are you?" she asked when he climbed into the cab seat beside her. "I'm good, busy with a few new clients, but I'm doing well, you?" "Great. I feel like I haven't seen you at all." This was her way of guilting him, again, about placing her across the floor from him and relegating her job duties to those that had little overlap with his. He was in charge of the business end of the company, and she with a degree in computer technology was in charge of overseeing the technicians that wrote the code for the websites and site designs they provided. "That's probably good, means we're busy," he joked. She rolled her eyes just as the cab pulled up in front of the first storefront they were looking at. It was a small glass window-fronted store that had a simple appeal. They paid for the cab and headed inside the empty store. They were greeted by a woman who walked them through the small place and allowed them to discuss the pros and cons of their needs and what the space offered. After half an hour, they left the spot and walked 2 blocks to Calvin's favorite taco truck. The truck was the same one that used to park outside of his apartment at night. He'd practically lived off of tacos for months when he was first starting the company. Sophia rolled her eyes at the truck, knowing very well it was his favorite but never having liked it in the history of their relationship. She reluctantly ordered a salad after he ordered 3 Cajun tacos. Sophia planted herself in the shade under a nearby tree waiting for their order while Cal paid the cashier. A strangely familiar voice said, "Cajun's my favorite too. You can't beat these tacos anywhere else in the city." He looked over at the person next to him and was greeted by Phaedra's smiling face. She was dressed in green today and had her hair up in a perfectly round bun. "Oh wow, Phaedra." He was mesmerized by her dark skin in the sunlight, and the way her eyes glistened slightly when she looked up at him. Hey Cal, right? She asked as he grabbed his receipt and stepped away from the truck. Yeah. Fancy meeting you here. I know. What are you doing on our side of town? He thought for a second at what this question could mean. He'd never specified where in town he worked, and he thought if anything she'd assume he worked close, given that he brought Ruby shopping. He also realized where he was, which he hadn't before. He was only 1 street and 2 blocks down from Phaedra's store. Coming from the opposite side of town as last night, he hadn't noticed, but now it was all he could think about. Another second reminded him that the final storefront location must be on the same block she worked on. The thought warmed his stomach unexpectedly. We're looking at storefronts for the company looking to expand a little, and our 2 options are right around here. Oh, cool. Sounds like business must be good if you're expanding. He nodded and smiled. Yeah, it is pretty good. I can't complain. But how are you? How's work? This question immediately felt wrong. How's work? Was something you would ask your wife after a long day, not a woman you met the day before. She didn't seem fazed by the question and replied, It's great. Usually quiet during the day, but that means more time to order and stock shelves, and keep the store looking good. It's the perfect thing, really. Cal poked out a lip in interest. Cool. That's great. He was cut off by a shrill voice that he recognized as Sophia's defensive voice. The one she used with women, sounding like a mama cat protecting her kittens. Cal, I'm starving, she whined. They'd been waiting for their food for less than 3 minutes, and the comment was completely unwarranted, but Cal knew the justification behind it and what was coming next. Oh hi, we haven't met. I'm Sophia. Sophia reached with the arm that wasn't grasping Cal's bicep to shake Phaedra's hand. Hi, I'm Phaedra, she replied cautiously. Do you work here? Sophia crowed. The comment made Cal cringe, knowing very well that Sophia was not that stupid. Phaedra's dress and heels were polar opposites of the taco truck polo the rest of the employees were wearing, though the color was a similar green. Phaedra opened her mouth in a confused expression and almost responded to the question, but she was cut off. Phaedra's and Calvin's names were both called from the truck window. Phaedra grabbed her food and Sophia snatched the 2 to-go boxes and quickly pushed Calvin away from the woman. Nice meeting you, sorry, but we're late. Sophia pressed. Calvin tried to wave and retreat back to Phaedra, but his new friend had already waved goodbye and started walking in the opposite direction. He wasn't surprised either. Sophia was the queen of uncomfortable encounters when it came to Calvin with other women, another reason he'd dissociated himself from her in the past years. Another thought entered his mind, the conversation he'd had with his sister. He was supposed to tell her he wasn't married and that Ruby wasn't his child. Wow, now you have no chance whatsoever, he thought, knowing Sophia's comments would be enough to scare anyone off. He was cold to Sophia for the rest of the day. He tried to forget about what she'd said, but he couldn't, and he hoped that Phaedra would easily forget. Phaedra was irritated after her second encounter with Cal. He seemed so genuinely interested in talking to her when he did, but all of the circumstances surrounding their 2 meetings were rubbing her the wrong way. At their first meeting, his flirtatiousness and lack of a wedding ring made it seem like he might be a single dad totally interested in her. But when the woman came in rushing them out of the store, it was clear they all belonged together. Or at least she thought it was, until the next day. And at the taco stand, even more confusing was that woman, a different woman than the day before, who made her mark on him more than obvious. She was giving off serious lioness vibes, and Phaedra was not interested in fighting for someone she hardly knew. Although the thought of him had crossed her mind, she'd been adamant about keeping the most likely involved man out of her head. Besides that, she found his extravagant spending to be a turn-off and not something she wanted to be involved in either. She took her and Candace's tacos back to the shop and ate in the back while watching for customers. "What's up?" asked Candace, noticing something off about Phaedra. Nothing?" Phaedra replied after swallowing her food. Candace returned a squinted look and remained silent until Phaedra confessed. Okay. Can I ask you a question about guys?" In a hypothetical scenario, what you would do? Sure. Candace's interest was clearly piqued. Say there's a guy customer in fact and he comes into the store with his kid. He's super nice, well-dressed, handsome, buys his daughter nice things, and flirts with you. What would you think? She paused there waiting for Candace to answer. Wearing a ring? No. I'd think single dad, into the hot girl at the kids' clothing store. Easy. Okay, Phaedra continued, okay, then what would you think if suddenly a woman rushes in the store, says, there you are, practically grabs the two and runs out? The corner of Candace's mouth pulled to the side in concern. Wife? Or ex-wife or girlfriend? That's what I'm thinking. Okay, additional scenario. The same guy, you see him the next day at a taco stand. Candace looked amused, realizing quickly this was definitely not a hypothetical. He seems excited to run into you, asks you about work and tells you about his like you've been friends forever. Again, seeming to flirt. Maybe the girl was his friend. Or sister? And he is into you. Just wait, it gets worse. While chatting at the food trucks, a woman, not the same woman, mind you, practically forces her way into your conversation. Pulls out the claws, asks you if you work at the damn taco truck and drags him away from you. Then what would you think? Geez, two women, one of whom is a total bitch, no ring, and a child. I'd say this guy is way too complicated and I'd probably maintain my distance next time I ran into him, Candace offered. Or, if he seemed genuine, maybe he's just being used by these women and he's looking for an honest, real and hardworking woman like you, and that's why he seemed interested. Maybe he really is. Phaedra seemed to consider that for a moment before replying. I guess it doesn't matter, it was just an interesting experience. I don't usually fall for the dads that come in here like that. Very few of them don't have rings, and the ones that don't obviously don't for a reason. It was just nice to see someone who obviously was capable of love because of his daughter, seem genuinely interested in me. Oh well, I'm sure I won't have to worry about it again. He bought enough clothes for the child to never have to come back again. Loaded? Beyond. He hardly blinked at the total, which was over a month's worth of my rent. Geez. Yeah, I've seen a few of those, but usually it's the women. Nice to see a man doting on his daughter though, that's kind of hot. You're telling me, sexy as hell. Phaedra heard the doorbell and tossed her lunch to head out to the customer. But she let the fantasies of a handsome, successful man run through her head for the rest of the day. She was done fighting them off, and they were welcome to stay as long as they wanted. Chapter 3. Cal wondered what kind of people went shopping at 7 o'clock in the morning, especially for children's clothes. He stood on the sidewalk in the freezing cold October morning air. Atlanta had a way of warming up at noon but staying brisk and breezy in the morning so that it was almost impossible to plan the right clothes to wear to stay comfortable. Why am I doing this again? She's going to think I'm a freak. He knew the reason why he was doing it. He wanted an actual chance to talk to Phaedra. He wanted to set up a time to sit down and talk without being interrupted by other people. After the incident at the taco truck, which he was more than angry at Sophia over, he needed the chance to explain himself. That Sophia wasn't his girlfriend and that Ruby wasn't his daughter. After he had left Sophia practically in tears at the elevator, he'd stormed back to his desk and quickly searched the operating hours of the clothing store, finding that it was open from 7 to 7 daily. He'd woken up at his regular time, but instead of arriving at the office at 7, he was standing in front of the store. The woman that walked towards him, eyeing him with concern before she started to unlock the door, was not Phaedra. "Can I help you?" she asked, clearly concerned about the strange man that was waiting for her. "Actually, I was hoping to catch Phaedra and speak with her. Will she be in soon?" She was about to respond when she glanced back over him, looking him up and down. A smile seemed to brighten her face. "Well, she's supposed to be here at 8, but usually she comes in a little early. You're free to come in and wait if you'd like." That'd be great, I appreciate it, he said sweetly. He was used to women given in to his charm. He was handsome and raised in the South, which seemed to be a deadly combination. And although he knew that fact, he fought the urge to use it so much that it became him. He wanted to be a gentleman and thought that maybe he could learn a little bit more about the beautiful brown-skinned girl from the store owner. She opened the door and ushered him in. He hung his coat on one of the complimentary hooks by the door. He wandered through the store and found the lounge chairs by the changing area, and he promptly took a seat. "Would you like any coffee?" came the woman's voice from the back. "Sure, cream and sugar if you have it," he replied. A few moments later, she returned with 2 to-go cups of piping hot liquid in them and handed one to him. He took a long sip and let the coffee run down his throat and coat the sides of his stomach before he looked up. She took a seat in the chair next to him and seemed interested in talking to him. "I never introduced myself, I'm Candace, store owner." "How do you know Phaedra?" she asked. "I came by the store the other day with my niece and I met Phaedra, and she really made an impression on me. Very beautiful and intelligent woman." He leaned in closer as if to tell her a secret, and if I'm being honest, I haven't been able to get her out of my head since then. And I ran into her again yesterday at lunch and I didn't get the chance to ask her out like I wanted to, so here I am. Candace giggled. "Oh. I see. Well, good luck." She hesitated a moment as if considering whether or not she should say something. "If you know something that might keep me from embarrassing myself, I'm all ears," Cal said. "Listen, she paused, realizing she didn't know his name. "Call me Cal," he said with a wink. "Listen, Cal, I'll tell you what I know, but only because you seem like a nice and genuine guy. And then I'll let you decide if you still want to ask her out, okay?" He nodded. "Phaedra is one of the sweetest and hardworking women I know, but when it comes to men she's had a string of bad luck. Her most recent ex-boyfriend, who she dated for almost 2 years, left her for another woman. And it was an ugly breakup. As much as Phaedra tried to act strong, she was very visibly affected. I think she saw a future with him, and since then, she seems to resist most advances she's encountered. Not that she'll say no to you, just know that if she does it might be because of that. And ever since then she's been unstoppable here at the shop and in helping me plan for my expansion. She practically begged me to let her run one on her own once we got it up and running. She's a strong girl and a very hard worker." He didn't like the idea that she would say no because another man had messed with her head, not that he didn't understand, but he hated the thought. He could see how much she loved her job the day she'd helped him and Ruby. There was something very powerful and attractive about a woman who could, and wanted to, provide for herself. That was a major difference between Sophia and Phaedra, and he figured it was the first of many differences between the two. Candace and Cal spoke for a while, continuing to talk about Phaedra and the new location Candace was planning on opening. The bank had approved the small loan they'd requested, they were just looking for the right spot and logistics to work themselves out. 2 cups of coffee later the doorbell rang out and Cal practically jumped out of his chair, which caused Candace to let out a chuckle. "Sorry I'm late, traffic was the word started but never ended as Phaedra made her way to the back, but stopped short at the sight of Cal standing in the middle of the store. The puzzled look on her face only grew when she found Candace sitting in the chair next to him, grinning. "Phaedra, it seems as though you have a gentleman caller. He's very handsome and nice. I'll take your bag. Why don't you sit and have a chat?" Candace pulled the purse from Phaedra's shoulder and disappeared behind the break-room door. "Hey," she said hesitantly. "Everything okay with the clothes?" Her confusion was obvious. "Oh yes. They're great, I think." "Listen, sit. I came here to talk to you." She walked over and sat down in the chair next to him. He pulled his closer. "I wanted to say, first of all, Ruby isn't my daughter." The comment was kind of strange and out of place, but Phaedra thought she knew where this was going. "She's my niece, and the woman I was with is my sister." "I didn't have time to explain, I'm sorry, I just got really flustered around you. And I wanted to tell you yesterday, but didn't have the time." The words flew out of his mouth. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, polite but curious. "I was flirting with you, or trying to, and I didn't want you to think I was some cheating douchebag who flirts with women while his daughter is around and his wife is away, so I came here to tell you that and to convince you to have dinner with me tonight, if you're available." He wanted to say more to try to argue his case, but he forced himself to stay quiet and wait for her reply. "You're asking me out?" She believed his niece's story, but thought it was strange that he didn't mention the angry female from yesterday at the taco truck. "Yes, I am." She thought for a second while watching him. His smile was so genuine, and he was so damn sexy. His blonde hair was in a perfect wave across his head, making him look a lot like Captain America. And he was wearing another well-fitting suit that she couldn't help but want to rip off. She was going to say no and explain to him that she didn't have the time or the strength to date right now, but something inside her told her not to do that. She thought, if anything, here was a handsome man that she could spend a few nights with to relieve the impossible tension that had taken up residence inside her. A second thought crossed her mind, one that she hadn't thought of in the last 2 days. She'd never been with a white man. It didn't bother her, she'd always found men of all races to be attractive, but this was different. She'd never had to experience the public humiliation and judgment that often came with interracial romances, especially those where the woman was black. This would be new territory for her, regardless of whether or not it lasted more than a night. Everything inside her told her to say no. Except here was a man who had shown up to her work first thing in the morning just to get the chance to ask her out. A man she'd had an undeniable connection with days earlier. "Okay, sure. Sounds fun." She didn't sound too enthusiastic, but she had a pleasant smile on her face, one that he returned. "Okay, great. Well, I'll pick you up here at 7:30? She nodded her head. "Yeah, that'll be great." They said their goodbyes, and he promptly left the store. She stayed seated for a moment, considering her options with this strange man. He could be full of shit. She considered the possibility this Casanova was wooing all the eligible females in Atlanta, knocking them up and leaving them out to dry. This seemed unlikely, but then again she'd met her fair share of master manipulators and professional actors. It was a possibility. He could just be oblivious. Phaedra felt like most men would explain whether or not the child they were buying clothes for was theirs if they were intent on flirting with you while in their presence. So maybe he was an idiot, or so distracted that he hadn't thought about it. Either way, that didn't bode well for a future. Or, he could be an honest, good guy who likes buying his niece clothes and the girl at the taco truck? Could there be another logical explanation for her defensive behavior? He hadn't yet mentioned her, and she couldn't tell if that was a strategy or not. "I can smell your brain overheating from here," yelled Candace from behind one of the display shelves she was restocking. Phaedra rolled her eyes and stood up from her chair, walking over to help Candace with her task. "Not overheating, I'm just trying to figure out what to do about this guy." "You mean Cal? The super hot business owner that you drooled about yesterday? You didn't mention he was the most beautiful man alive." "He's not the most beautiful," she tried to think who was. "Idris Elba, maybe?" The disapproving look on Candace's face told her she was wrong. "Regardless. I mean, he's a nice guy, or he seems to be. There are a few inconsistencies that are a little weird, so I don't want to get my hopes up. But also, you know how I feel about men who blow that much money at once." These feelings had spurred from her last relationship. Kevin had started buying her things, jewelry, trips, and even a car. And as he did, she started noticing inconsistencies with him as well. Shortly after that, she found out he was cheating on her. After that, she'd vowed to take notice of when men did that and why. "Faye, why don't you just go out and enjoy yourself? Hell, maybe even get laid. And after that, then you can analyze everything he said to try to figure out if he's playing you. Just enjoy one night, and try not to fall in love with him." "I'm definitely not going to do that. I'll go and have a good time and see where it leads. Definitely not getting attached." Famous last words. She felt like she was reading Candace's mind, knowing the woman wanted to say the exact words, but wouldn't. Phaedra spent the rest of the day working intermittently while thinking about Cal and their date that night. She hoped for the best, but it had been so long since she'd been on a date that she could hardly fathom how it would end. Calvin had reserved a table at one of his favorite restaurants, Esh, a small Italian place owned and operated by an Italian family. He picked Phaedra up at 7:30 outside of the shop, where he stood waiting to open her car door. She smiled at this gesture and allowed him to help her into the car. "Do you like Italian food?" he asked. She chuckled. "I mean, what's not to love about garlic bread and pasta and wine?" "That's true." The restaurant was located on the edge of the city in a quiet and seemingly rundown area of town. He hoped he'd made a good choice and that she wouldn't be put off by the atmosphere or the fact that he'd driven her so far from her store. "So, tell me a little bit about yourself. You successfully run a media company and you have a niece. That's all I know," she said. He liked that she was interested in his story. "There's not much to tell. I started the company out of college." "You majored in business?" she asked. "Yeah, but it wasn't my passion. I loved TV and technology, and was so blown away by the fact that companies like MySpace and Facebook could bring people together and provide a service, making so much money without a single customer or patron on their outlet actually spending a dime." I never thought about it that way. That's interesting though. That's how powerful ad space is. Businesses will pay thousands of dollars just to get their products in the heads of people. Exactly. So that's when I decided that I wanted to do that too, in a way, help people and companies connect in a way that benefits everyone and no one feels like they're being used or not getting their money's worth. Mutualism. The word stunned him and warmed his cheeks. It was his dream, his biggest goal for the company, and something that had become very hard to explain to his coworkers, especially Sophia, who had been with him from the beginning. Here, there was a woman he'd only known for 48 hours, and she understood his top priority and vision for his company. "Yes, exactly. Funny you should say that. No one I work with can get past the money and image of being the top media group. But I never really cared about that. I just want to deliver a product that's needed and well respected in our field. Maybe fame and fortune will come from it, maybe not." She smiled at his words, but didn't reply because they were pulling into a parking spot on the street. "You're going to love this place. I've been coming here for as long as I can remember." "Awesome, I'm excited," she replied. He parked the car on a side street and indicated that she wait for him to open the door for her. He ran around the car and helped her out of the passenger's side. "Thank you," she said in response. He rested his hand on her lower back carefully as he escorted her towards the restaurant. The place was quiet except for a couple of older couples tucked away in booths at the sides of the restaurant. A sign read, "Please seat yourself," and Cal ushered her to a quiet booth that had one tall candle flickering in the center. He waited until she was seated to scoot into his side of the booth. There were a few awkward seconds of silence before an elderly woman wandered over and asked in a thick Italian accent, "Hi, here's some menus. What will you be drinking?" Cal looked over at Phaedra, who had an unknowing look on her face. "Red or white wine?" he asked. "Definitely red." "Perfect. Got a Grignolino on hand?" "Of course, bottle?" she asked, to which he nodded. "Thank you." And with that, the little woman left and the two were left to their silence. "You know your wine," Phaedra stated. I know a little bit. I love Italian food and took a couple of courses in Italian wine and food pairings. Just a hobby, but I do love to practice and experiment with what I know. So hopefully this was a good choice." "I'm sure it will be," Phaedra said while flipping over her menu. A few moments later, the woman returned with the bottle of wine, uncorked it, and poured 2 generous glasses. She took their order, a large salad to share, eggplant parmesan for Phaedra and spaghetti and meatballs for Cal. "And a basket of breadsticks," Cal called out after the woman. "Of course," the woman chuckled. They clinked their glasses, and each took a second to sip the wine. "Oh, yeah, that's great," Phaedra said, taking another, much larger sip. "Good, I'm glad you like it." Phaedra waited a moment before starting the conversation she wanted to. "Okay, so can I ask you a question?" "Sure, anything," Cal replied, intrigued. "Do you date a lot of black women, like when you do go out? Are you just into dark-skinned women?" Cal's cat-like reflexes sent his napkin up to his lips in time to catch the spray of wine that came out. Phaedra laughed at the sight, realizing it was her question that had sparked the outburst. "Sorry, I'm just curious. Some guys have fetishes or whatnot." "Absolutely not," Cal replied. "And you don't have to apologize for asking, it's a legitimate question. Actually, I've only ever dated one other girl that wasn't white and she was Asian, for like 2 months in college. She was cool, but we had nothing in common." Anyway, he knew he was rambling. "No, I didn't ask you out because I have a fetish for black women or want to check something off my list. I asked you out because I felt like we had a genuine connection that day I brought Ruby into your store, and then it turned out to be destiny because I saw you the next day. You're very beautiful and clearly very driven, and I like that about a woman, so I thought I'd ask you out." It was obvious, by her wide smile, that she liked that answer. "Well, that's so nice of you to say. I'm glad. I've actually never dated a white man, so this will be a learning experience for both of us." "Oh God, I'm representing a whole race of men, that's a lot of pressure." She reached over and grasped his hand, replying, "Oh, I'm sure you'll do fine." He smiled, his first glass of wine was gone and hers was running low. He considered that they should pace themselves before the food, but it tasted so good and made their conversations easier than ever. He poured himself another glass and topped off hers. The food came out within minutes and they ate and chatted about work and what they liked to do for fun, and continued to do damage to the bottle of wine. They skipped dessert but gladly poured the remainder of the wine bottle into their glasses. Cal was feeling the buzz when Phaedra hit him with another shocking question. "Okay, so let me ask you, what's the point of this date? Like, what do you hope to get out of it?" The concerned look and hesitation on his face lead her to further clarify her question. "You said you asked me out because you think I'm beautiful and hardworking, but are you looking for a wife or hookup? I'm genuinely curious, dash." He waited for a second before leaning in closer to reply. "I want to have sex with you, but I also want to talk to you and get to know you so that maybe I'll have sex with you for the rest of my life. So the answer to your question is probably both." The grin on his face was pure, and Phaedra couldn't help but smile. He knew it was a weird and forward way of answering her, but it was the truth partially influenced by his growing inebriation, but the truth nonetheless. It didn't take him long to realize that his answer was the perfect one. A half-cocked eyebrow and a set of recently wetted lips motivated him to gulp down the last 2 swallows of wine and take his credit card to the store owner. Within 10 minutes, they were back in the car, driving towards his condo. She slid her hand along his thigh as he drove, not too high to cause a problem, but in the perfect place to drive him crazy. He wanted his mouth on hers, her legs intertwined with his, and the images taunted him as he fought the ever-growing urge between his legs. Chapter 4. Phaedra's buzz was wearing off by the time they pulled into the parking garage of Cal's condo. She figured that was the best thing though, given that first date sex where both parties were drunk was never really a good idea. As the buzz left her, realization of where she was started to set in. Calvin had money, and a lot of it. His condo was easily worth millions of dollars, and the cars that were parked nearby easily cost more than her own house. Cal parked in a spot titled 502. Phaedra couldn't help but make a comment about it. "Well, your own parking space." His face turned into a smirk and he replied, "Oh, yeah. And there's a 502B for guests." He motioned across the parking lot to a matching row of parking spots, some of which were full and some of which weren't. Each spot had a number with a smaller letter B next to it. "So when you come visit me," he winked, "you can park there." Phaedra made sure to raise her eyebrows in over-exaggerated excitement. Thank God, I wouldn't want to have to park on the street with the peasants, she joked. Right, that'd be terrible. He grabbed her hand and walked her towards an elevator. They got in and rode up to the top floor. The elevator ride was quiet except for the rattle of the small metal car. They stood on opposite sides, facing each other. He looks like he wants to eat me, she thought. She couldn't help but feel the same way. His pink, flushed skin looked almost edible, and the way he chewed on his lip while looking her up and down was irresistible. Phaedra made the conscious decision that although there were a few strange things about this guy, she was going to forget them until the end of the night. She didn't have to marry him or have his children, but she was going to have sex with him, and by the way he nibbled on his own lip, she could tell it was going to be amazing. Out of the elevator, there were only 2 doors, one on the left and one on the right. 502. They turned to the right and he fumbled for his keys. Phaedra could only fathom the size of the condo, given that there were only 2 units on the entire floor, and she could only assume the same went for each floor. She fought the urge to ask him how much he paid for the place and instead followed him silently into the unit. Jesus! The place was as amazing inside as she'd imagined. Perfectly furnished, and in no way Cal did it himself, given that every picture frame, every piece of furniture was placed in the most ideal position. This place is crazy. How long have you lived here? She didn't wait for him to answer the question or for him to give her a tour. Instead, she started walking along the edge of the nearest wall she found, touching and examining everything. He laughed. How long? I mean, I bought the place about 10 years ago, I guess. Right when Queen started taking off. Wait, how old are you? This was drunk Phaedra talking, because it was a question she'd asked herself and tried to find on Google, but had only narrowed it down to 40s. Phaedra herself was 41 and figured he was around the same age. And humorously, she found that age didn't matter to her much, especially with Cal, since age differences would be the least of their worries. 44 next month. She replied with a and kept exploring. Is that bad? He asked, finding 2 glasses in the kitchen cabinet across the room from Phaedra. No, we're close enough. She smiled. Wine. Phaedra thought she should say no, but she figured a little bit to keep the buzz up and her wits about her would be a good idea. She nodded. The condo was a large open floor plan with high ceilings and hardwood floors. The kitchen had a huge island with 4 bar stools and a TV. The living room held 3 large couches in a U-shape that looked out over a not as great view of Atlanta as his office, but similar. Bedroom? She asked. The question must have startled him, because he coughed behind her. I just want the tour, I want to see the rest of it, she insisted. Sure, he joked, coming up behind her with a wine glass in his hand. Ah, thank you. Yeah, the bedrooms are this way, I'll show you. She followed him down a hall that had a small utility room with a washer and a dryer, and a large bathroom. At the end of the hall were 2 rooms, one on either side. One was a bedroom that had been turned into a massive office and studio, the other had the door shut, so Phaedra could only assume it was his bedroom. After you, he motioned, and she turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room was amazing. One entire wall was a window. The bed was covered in a light gray duvet with enough pillows to keep you company, but not too many to be in the way. Matching dressers and nightstands adorned the sides of the room, and Phaedra flipped on one light to reveal a small room-sized closet that she almost fainted at the sight of. This is amazing. I want a closet like this. He laughed at her and watched as she reached a hand out to touch the sleeves of his shirts. She moved quickly to the one other door in the room that led to a large bathroom which had a clawfoot bathtub. Oh my God! Cal, this bathtub. This is literally my dream tub. She practically ran over and started twirling the knobs. Cal laughed. You can take a bath if you want. No. I just really love it. I'm serious, why don't you take a bath in it? Trust me, I don't think it's ever been used except maybe by Ruby a couple times when she comes over and stays with me. You should let me fill it up, and you can enjoy it." She squinted her eyes at him playfully. "Are we both getting in it, or just me?" He raised an eyebrow and stepped closer to her. He flipped onto his side and balled up the towel, chucking it onto the floor. They both climbed up towards the head of the bed and folded themselves together under the covers, not able to mutter more than a few words before they both drifted off to sleep. Coming back to himself, almost like a dream, Cal noticed Phaedra shuffling around the now dark room. He tried to ask her what she was doing, but every time he tried to speak he started drifting back to sleep. At one point, Phaedra walked quietly past his bed in her dress from the night before and her shoes in her hand. She disappeared out of his bedroom door, and he listened groggily to what she was doing. A few moments passed before he heard the front door open and close and the elevator bell ding faintly from the hall. He nodded off once more before he checked the time on his phone, which read 12:15 a.m. Wait, what? How's she going to get home? The questions caused him to lift up his phone in an attempt to call her and at least let him offer to drive her home, but the thoughts were too slow and the sleep urge was too strong. Instead, he fell back asleep with his phone in his hand, dreaming of bathtubs. Chapter 5. Cal woke up with a hard object under his back. His cell phone. It took him a few minutes to remember why his phone was in his bed. She left in the middle of the night. I wonder why. He didn't have a hard time making up a legitimate excuse for her. It was, after all, sex on the first date, and it wasn't too much of a shocking scenario to leave after the deed. But Cal had had a nice time with her at dinner the night before, and although unbelievably attracted to her, he genuinely liked spending time with her in whatever way he could. It was that thought that caused him uncertainty after their night together. Maybe she wasn't interested in anything more, or maybe he wasn't as interesting as she'd thought. Or maybe it had been bad sex. No, that definitely wasn't it. He didn't let himself linger on the possibilities before he got out of bed and started to clean himself up. It wasn't until he was getting out of the shower that he realized he didn't have Phaedra's number to text her how much he'd enjoyed the night before. Idiot, you spent hours with this woman and you didn't think to ask for her number. Immediately, thoughts of doom surrounded him. This was an asshole move if he ever saw one. He'd slept with her and not taken the time to make sure he'd have a way to contact her again, making it seem as though he wasn't interested. He dried off from the shower and took an extra minute to put on a nice suit and tie combo. He decided that he would head over to Phaedra's shop at the end of the day to ask for her number and tell her in person how much fun he'd had last night. He made it to work a little late but was in a pleasant mood. That was, until Sophia showed up with the worst attitude and dragging 2 interns behind her. The 3 barged through the door to Calvin's office, not even stopping to check with his secretary. Calvin took a second to take in the group that stood before him, a motley crew if he ever saw one. The 2 interns, who couldn't have been more than 25, had horrified looks in their eyes. Whoa, Sophia. You can't just barge in here, I could have been in a meeting. Well, this is more important than anything else you're doing, trust me. These interns you assigned me, they've single-handedly been able to ruin all the work we've done on the contract with LinkedIn, and it's due tomorrow. The code was perfect, the plans were perfect, and now it's gone a jumbled-up mess. Okay, calm down. Cal looked at the 2 teary-eyed interns. One had obviously been crying prior to this meeting, and the other one refused to make eye contact with him. I'm sure we can get it fixed, we'll just need a little time. Have you called them and explained the situation? And what situation is that? That some idiots tried to improve a perfectly good code and in doing so killed everything? Yes, Cal replied blankly. He hated when she got overdramatic because it made her look dumb, and she wasn't dumb. In fact, she was one of the most intelligent women he knew, so much so that he had wanted to be with her and start a company with her. But she started to change into the woman that stood screeching in front of him now. No. They should have to call and explain what happened. This is LinkedIn we're talking about. Ah, now it made sense. Perhaps surprisingly to everyone else at the company, Cal didn't place as much value on the LinkedIn account as he should have. He wasn't obsessed with landing a social media giant like they were. Mutualism. He remembered his conversation with Phaedra from the night before. That was what he wanted out of his business, not to become some media mogul who had his days planned out to a T. Sophia, it's LinkedIn, and that's exactly why they'll wait. They don't need what we're offering, so they must want it, and because of that a few days won't hurt anything when we explain the situation to them. Please stop torturing the interns and get everyone back to work on the issues until we have a product that's ready to send out. Got it? Sophia paused with a horrified squint across her face. Are you kidding me? This is my company too. Cal's expression was unamused. She had no claim over the company, though she'd helped him start it. The fact that she worked there was only because he let her stay. A fact she tended to forget. He was prepared to bicker back and forth with her like he always did, but something stopped him. It was the thought of the beautiful black woman that he'd shared a bed with the night before. A woman who laughed instead of argued and was honest about her needs and wants. She was not Sophia. You all are free to leave, get back to work. I'll be down in a little bit to assess the damage. We'll work out a game plan to get them their product, he said to the group, but locked eyes with the interns. They retreated, leaving Sophia alone. I meant all of you, go, he insisted. She huffed and trudged away like an angry teenager. He spent the afternoon in the bullpen with the entire coding and product teams. People were running around and yelling back and forth between cubicles. Half the large area of cubicles waiting for answers and instruction from the other half. It was dark by the time he even had the chance to look down at his watch, and seeing that it was 8:15, his heart lurched. He'd missed his chance to go to the shop and talk to Phaedra. He again thought about how angry or upset she might be that he'd slept with her and never called. But then again, she was the one that had slipped out after sex. Maybe she wasn't interested in anything more. That thought upset him as well. He had to find a time to go see her, at least to get her phone number so that he could talk to her whenever he wanted. After 3 days, Phaedra had given up on Calvin and almost forgotten about him entirely. She wasn't a complete stranger to late-night hookups and one-night stands, but she hadn't had one since college. She was just surprised, although she knew she had no reason to expect anything else. Except maybe she did. He'd been so sweet and had spent a lot of time opening up to her just for it to be a one-time thing. She remembered how she'd felt that night they'd slept together. The sex had been amazing, awe-inspiring actually. And she'd collapsed onto him afterward. They tried to talk for a few minutes, but both of them ended up drifting off to sleep, and that was that. About an hour later she woke up. As it turns out, a man's chest isn't comfortable enough to sleep on for an entire night. She remembered her car parked outside of the shop and thought about awkward conversations that came the morning after encounters like those. The justifications were there. She needed to get up and leave. But she'd stared at him, debating on whether or not she wanted to get up. He was so handsome. His tanned but light skin underneath her dark fingers was empowering. She felt like a warrior, like she had conquered something herself maybe. The pain she'd experienced following her breakup with Kevin was the worst she'd experienced in a long time. But there, lying next to Cal, was different. There was a true connection, but it didn't have to mean anything. She could get up and walk out, and she would be okay the next day. She didn't require the constant support and motivation of a man anymore. But now that he hadn't called in days, she was starting to feel that pain again, and she hated herself for it. She was supposed to be stronger, better than the girl that she'd been when she was with Kevin. She wasn't supposed to need a man for anything, and here she was, confused and hurt over a guy she'd only known for a few days. I thought you were over it, asked Candace, who had clearly noticed the drop in enthusiasm in Phaedra over the past few days. I am. What, why? You aren't. You've been folding that shirt over and over again for 15 minutes. You already said you knew why he didn't call you, didn't give him your number. What did you expect? I mean, he obviously knows where the store is, or could call the number if he really wanted to get in touch with me. but obviously he doesn't. It's fine, I just didn't realize it was going to upset me so much. That's the hard part. Okay, but Faye, you walked out after you had sex. What do you think he thought? Even if he did have the phone number, I don't know that he would use it. You left, snuck out, so he's probably thinking, hey, we had fun, but she isn't interested in anything more. I know. I messed up. You don't have to keep reminding me that I don't know the proper dating etiquette anymore. I've been out of the game a long time. Yes, you have. But this is how you get back in. You forget about this guy and go meet 5 just like him. Phaedra rolled her eyes only slightly, but she knew that her friend had a point. She hadn't given him her number, and she'd snuck out in the middle of the night, so there was little shock in the fact Calvin hadn't tried to reach out. It still hurt nonetheless. Fine. Phaedra went back to folding children's shirts and leggings. That afternoon they closed early, and the 2 women took a few hours in the back room to discuss their new store. One positive thing that had come out of dinner with Cal had been a newfound motivation to pursue her goals. The biggest of which was helping Candace open a few stores in South Atlanta and hopefully being the store manager there. They discussed locations, budgets, and stock quotes. The loan they'd gotten for the project was a small one, and the store could only be about 2/3 the size of the original. Phaedra, however, loved the idea of a smaller and more functional version of their larger store. Somewhere where customers could go to fulfill their needs, but not replace the extravagance and true boutique nature of their first store. I'm exhausted, these numbers are blurring together. Want to finish up tomorrow? Asked Candace. Actually, I'm just going to finish them up myself. I'm going to have to be able to do this eventually, aren't I? True, okay, if you're sure. Be careful getting home. I will, night Candace. She walked her friend to the front door where she locked it after her and dimmed the lights so that she wouldn't be bothered. The sun was still up, but it was after store hours, and she figured she'd take another hour to tighten up the budget and stock orders before heading home. Math wasn't her strong suit, but she focused on the numbers, being sure to double and triple check that their product order would yield the right numbers. She went back and forth for a while, but eventually became distracted by a rattling sound out in the front part of the shop. Immediately she grew tense. Very few people ever tried to come into the shop at the end of the day, and no one with a strong pounding fist like the one she heard. She made a quick mental note to reactivate the security system and make sure the new place had a functioning one before she grabbed her cell phone and walked out of the back room. It only took her a minute to realize who it was pounding on the door. The tall, blond man in a long black coat huddled close to the door smiling when he saw her. By that time it was too late to turn back, too late to hide and pretend like she didn't see him or know who he was. She wasn't in the mood to talk to him. Her brain hurt from the number crunching, and she was so tired of thinking and worrying about their night together. Reluctantly, she unlocked and opened the door. Thank God, it looked for a second like you were going to leave me out there. It's so cold. Yeah, it is. Do you need something for Ruby? She asked with a straight face. We're kinda closed. This was a very obviously passive-aggressive comment, because why would Calvin be at her shop late at night buying Ruby, his niece, clothes? No? I came to talk to you obviously. She shut and locked the door behind him and they started walking deeper into the store. Okay, he seemed to sense her irritation. I've been trying to get over here. I didn't have your number, which was stupid of me to not ask for. But I didn't have the phone number and I was planning to come to the store and the end of the day the last couple of days, but some shit hit the fan with this LinkedIn account at work and everyone is losing their mind, and of course it's my job to keep it all running smoothly, Calvin blurted. Phaedra couldn't help but love this side of him. Seeing him like this told her that he wasn't always and still really wasn't a suit-wearing, stuck-up, money-spending man at heart. Sure, he did those things and put off that vibe, but he was a nerd deep down. He had a passion for doing the right thing in his business, and that was something she admired in him. When he blurted out words like that, it was more like she was talking to the college kid that wanted to start his own business instead of the guy that slept with her and never called. Sorry, I am rambling. I just don't want you to be mad at me. I came here as soon as I could. I'm sorry. You don't have to explain it to me, Phaedra said. I didn't leave you my number, that was my fault too. She'd felt so strongly earlier when she was talking to Candace and planning to get over Cal and on to the next guy. But now that he was standing in front of her, apologizing for what he claimed was a misunderstanding, she didn't know what to think. She was torn. Most of her didn't believe him, it was all too sketchy and too consistent to be a coincidence. A small part of her didn't care if he was lying. He was hot, and if she could manage to take her emotions out of it, he was good for her. She needed to be getting out and enjoying her life, and a guy like this was the perfect way to do it. Except for the smallest fraction of her thoughts that considered maybe he was telling the truth and maybe he was genuinely interested in getting to know her. If that was the case, she needed to decide if she was capable of returning the feelings, and if so, sneaking out at midnight was not the way to start a successful relationship. Why did you leave? He asked, relaxing into the chair. Phaedra had been expecting this conversation, but she hadn't adequately prepared an answer, so she opted for the truth. In her own chair, she pulled her knees up and her legs underneath her, so she was facing him. She blinked a few times, her eyes searching the ground as if looking for the perfect words to start. To be honest, I wasn't really sure if I was supposed to stay. I mean, it's been such a long time since I've gone out with someone and gone home with them that I don't really know what the norm is. I also figured that you would be busy the next day and not want to have to deal with getting rid of me and all that, so I just left. Phaedra's words sunk to the bottom of her stomach. She hated the way they made her sound weak and embarrassed when she wasn't even sure how she felt. I asked you what you wanted out of the date and you said sex and/or something more long-term, but I never asked myself that question. And frankly, I don't know the answer. That's okay, you don't have to right now, Cal said. Well, I kind of do. I was in a relationship with a guy for a long time, and when it didn't end well, I realized that I needed to focus on myself and bettering myself. That's why I'm so involved here and in the development of our new store. Because I need a distraction is one part of it, but I also need to be independent and be able to operate on my own. I didn't ask myself what I wanted out of our date because I didn't know. Did I want to have sex with you? Hell yes, you're attractive and kind, and the perfect guy to do that with. But did I want to stick around to deal potentially anything more than that? Not really. Just because I honestly don't know yet, and it would be unfair for me to have stayed and given off vibes that I can't confirm, if that makes sense. Cal waited a minute before responding. Phaedra. We don't have to do anything you don't want to. If you're not ready, or don't know if you're ready for something serious, then let's just have fun and enjoy ourselves. I can be okay with that too. But I do want to say that I have a blast when I'm with you, so I don't just want this to be a hookup and that's where I stand. The rest is up to you. God, this man says the perfect words. He was either an A-list actor or he was a really good guy. Only time would tell. I have fun when I'm with you too, she insisted. I do. Just so long as we can agree to just have fun with very little expectations, I have no problem seeing where this goes. There was something else bothering her, but she needed to approach the subject carefully in case he didn't react well to it. The woman from the taco truck. The tall blonde who hung over his every word and exerted her dominance immediately upon sensing Phaedra as a threat. Who was she, and why didn't he mention her? As she started to form the question in her mind, the silence must have gotten to Cal, because he stood up and grabbed her hand. She wasn't exactly sure where this was going, but she had an idea, and almost immediately the thoughts of the woman dissipated from her memory. The hallway that led to the break room, bathroom, and storage area was dark and empty. Before she knew it, her back was pressed flat against the cold wall and Cal's hands were on her skin. Phaedra liked the way she felt when the two of them were together. It was better than being in public and dealing with strange glances or spending money. It was easy, just the two of them, and Phaedra wondered if it could possibly last. Chapter 6. Cal, get up. You have to get up. Candace is going to be here any minute. Phaedra shook him awake and was greeted by a groggy set of blue eyes. What? He tried to lift himself off the couch slowly and wiped at his eyes, trying to focus on what Phaedra was saying. We have to go. We slept too long. It's almost 7 and Candace can't find you here, Phaedra insisted. Cal smiled but let her pull him up off the couch. I really don't think she'll mind. She likes me. I don't think she likes anyone having sex on her couch. True, Phaedra threw his pants at him from where he'd left them in the corner of the break room. He pulled them on quickly and grabbed his shirt. Okay, great, this was fun, she said, pushing him towards the front of the store. Yes, it was. Phaedra unlocked the door, peeking out to ensure that Candace hadn't arrived. Wait. I'm not leaving without your number again. He pushed his phone towards her. Phaedra sighed, clearly anxious. She quickly typed her phone number into his contact list and handed it back to her. He kissed her quickly on the lips and smiled. Okay, see ya later. She smiled slightly and waved before disappearing behind the door to the shop. She let herself take a few long gasping breaths inside the closed door. She felt reckless, but loved it. If Candace had found her in there with him, sure, she would have been disappointed, but she knew she probably wouldn't be fired. Instead, she'd forced him out more for her own sanity. She felt excited but also dirty and wild by acting this way with him. The last few months of being so confident and sure of every move she made was being unraveled by one man, and she wasn't sure how to handle it. So when she'd woken up wrapped naked in his arms, she'd immediately panicked. Were things moving too fast with a man she wasn't even entirely sure about? She couldn't answer her own questions except with an undeniable attraction for the man and a feeling in the pit of her stomach that he was worth it. Flirty text messages flooded Phaedra's phone for the entire day, and she fought warm cheeks and wet panties and the thought of what they'd done the night before. Needless to say, she didn't inform Candace of what happened, only mentioning that she'd given him her number and they were in contact. Every buzz of her phone sent shivers through her, excitement at the thought of more time spent with Cal, especially now that they'd talked about their expectations. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon her phone rang. His name and number popped up on the screen. Hello, she answered. Hey, it's Cal. Hey, Cal, she responded sarcastically. Listen, can I send a car for you for lunch tomorrow? I thought you could come to the office, I could show you around and we could eat. You could tell Candace it's a work lunch if you want. I can try to convince Elite Boutique to join our customer list, he joked. She chuckled, but something unsettled her in the offer. I don't know if she'll buy that, but I'm sure she won't mind if I step out. But I can drive over to you, you don't need to send a car really. Oh, no. Don't worry about it. That way you don't have to park or any of that, and the driver will take you right to the lobby. Okay, what will we be eating? Excellent question. I was thinking sushi. What do you think? The same gut pain shot through her. Sushi's great. She tried to sound genuine. Perfect. So tomorrow, expect the car at, say 11:30. Just let me know if anything comes up and we can reschedule, no problem. Sounds great, she said. Awesome, I'm excited, see you then. Okay, bye, she said as she hung up the phone. Lunch at his office was a strange second date venue, but Phaedra thought she could get past that, knowing how much he loved his company and wanted to share that with her. That wasn't what was bothering her. Instead, it was something she'd forgotten in the time they spent together. The money. Coming from a poor family and having to work twice as hard for every dollar she made because she was a black woman, Phaedra hated pointless spending. And although he didn't advertise it or act like that kind of man now, she considered that it might only be a matter of time before he did. He had it all, the money, the car, the condo, the expensive suits, and she had no intention of being a trophy on his arm. Sushi and luxury cars with drivers were nice things, but completely unnecessary for a casual lunch in the office. She worried about it for a few more minutes before deciding that it was just his way of being nice, and if the money concerns continued, she could mention it to him if she thought she needed to. The car and driver arrived at the exact time they were supposed to. Candace had practically pushed Phaedra out of the shop when she heard that she was going out with Cal again. The drive to his office wasn't too far, and Phaedra found that it felt completely different to travel through the city in the backseat of a town car. The tinted windows and perfectly conditioned air made her feel like she was in a spaceship flying towards Cal's workplace. They arrived in the front loop of a tall building and the driver parked and walked around to open her door. He escorted her, without a word, to the lobby and towards the front desk. A guest for Mr. Dennison. Phaedra could practically feel the vibrations coming from his deep voice as he spoke to one of the women at the rounded desk. The woman looked up from her computer and glanced from the driver to Phaedra. The woman's eyes flitted back and forth across Phaedra's top half that was visible behind the desk and gave a disapproving look. Phaedra's blood started to boil, but she maintained a straight face. "Is he expecting her?" "Yes," the man replied in a slightly incredulous tone, which Phaedra was appreciative of. "Okay, hold on." The woman was clearly uninterested in helping them, and Phaedra grew bewildered as the woman made an outgoing call. Casually, the woman waited for whoever was on the other end of the line to pick up. "Hey, it's me," she said informally as if talking to her best friend. "Listen, there's a woman here to see Cal. Do you want to come get her?" Phaedra wasn't familiar with the goings-on of companies and big building politics, but she was fairly confident that this was not the typical way a guest was escorted to someone's office. The woman glanced Phaedra up and down again, lingering over her face or hair. "No, well, maybe." She paused another second before finishing the conversation. "Okay, great. See you then." She put down the phone and turned back to Phaedra and the driver, who was clearly losing patience at the interaction. "Sophia will be down to get you in a minute. You can wait right there," she indicated to a set of chairs near the elevators, with a large fake smile. Phaedra nodded, and spoke to the driver. "You don't have to wait, I'll be fine." He nodded and replied, "I'll be back to pick you up when you're done." "Thank you," Phaedra smiled and watched him walk away from the chair she sat down in. She waited at least 15 minutes, while fighting the evil glances from the woman at the desk. Eventually, Phaedra was greeted by a pair of long, perfectly shaped white legs adorned with a navy blue pencil skirt and white and blue polka dot blouse. At the top was the gorgeous, blonde face of the woman who had all but accosted her at the taco truck the other day. "Oh, hi Phaedra? Is it?" she said in the most condescending voice Phaedra thought she'd ever encountered. So, this was how it was going to be. Phaedra didn't even have time to consider what the woman was doing at Cal's office and what possible relationship they could have before she had to respond and follow her towards the elevators. Phaedra, actually. And I'm sorry I didn't catch your name. You must be Cal's secretary." Phaedra wasn't sure if that was true or not, but she figured if it wasn't, it would at least be mildly offensive. And emphasizing that she didn't know the woman's name should serve to explain that Cal had never once mentioned the woman to her. The flat face that greeted her once they were inside the elevator replied, "Sophia. And no, not his secretary. I'm his business partner and girlfriend." The small space was immediately 15 degrees hotter, and lucky for Phaedra, her skin hid blushing very well. This wasn't the time to argue with some woman she didn't know, but she also knew it was impossible to stand down at this point. Sophia had started something and Phaedra would surely try to finish it. "Oh, really? He never mentioned you in any of our conversations." "Why would he?" Sophia retorted, "He's very private." I don't know if I agree with that. He shared a lot with me, including how this company came to be, and interestingly, your name never came up." Phaedra was pleased for the moment but realized that if there was at any point a line between obvious hostility and harmless girl intimidation, she had just crossed it. Sophia scoffed and seemed like she was about to respond when the elevator slowed and the doors opened. They opened onto a large floor with a similar, but smaller front desk immediately out front. The woman there, the real secretary, stopped Sophia the moment she saw her. Is that Mr. Dennison's guest? Why did you dash? The woman clearly had expected to fetch Phaedra herself. They called me for some reason. It's no problem, I'll take her to Cal's office myself. The woman briskly walked away from the desk and to the back right corner of the building, indicating that Phaedra should follow. She practically had to run to keep up and was glad that the woman had opted for silence this time instead of daggers. Phaedra hadn't had to defend her territory in a long time, and although she technically had no claim over Cal, she liked making Sophia feel jealous. She couldn't help but wonder, though, how much truth there was to her words. Was Cal really dating this woman, or was she just an overprotective bitch? They arrived at a corner office lined with deep mahogany panels so that no one could see inside. The door read Calvin Dennison, CEO, and a small desk to the right of the door held a small, older woman's desk in matching mahogany. "Oh, you must be Phaedra," she yelped excitedly when she saw the two approaching. She shook Phaedra's hand and said, "Sophia, that's all for now, thank you." Sophia clearly didn't want to leave, and as the secretary knocked and began to crack open Cal's door, Sophia tried to peek in. Noticing that Phaedra was very well aware of her strange behavior, Sophia rolled her eyes and scoffed away. What a bizarre human. The woman ushered Phaedra into the office, smiled and shut the door behind her when she left. The office held a lot of matching mahogany furniture, a large desk, a big wood table with many chairs and multiple bookshelves. The best part of the office was the view, naturally. Phaedra remembered how long they had to travel in the elevator to land them this high up over the city. The corner of the office was completely glass. A small couch was set to look out over the city, and all Phaedra found herself wanting to do was bury herself in it. In front of the window was Cal. He had the phone pressed to one ear and was fiddling with a Rubik's Cube in the other. Phaedra found this fascinating. She walked in, unsure of where to sit. It seemed Cal hadn't heard them enter. She walked over to the window and slid a hand across the back of Cal's white dress shirt. If he was surprised, he didn't make it known. Instead, he reached over and put the Rubik's Cube arm around her and, with the phone still pressed to his ear, planted a kiss on her lips. When he drew back, he was smiling, and Phaedra moved towards the couch where she took a seat. "Listen, Mitch, I gotta go. You've got everything you need to clear this up, right?" Liking the response on the other end of the phone, he responded, "Great, I'll talk to you later." "Thanks. Bye." He looked over at a very comfortable and awestruck Phaedra. "It's amazing, isn't it?" he asked her. "It's perfect. I mean, I've seen this view before, rooftop bars and whatnot. But it's so quiet up here. You can see it all, but you can hardly hear anything. It's crazy." "I know, I'm a lucky guy." "Well, you've worked hard for it, I think that's more than luck." "Maybe," he said with a smile as he sat down next to her and put his arm around her, kissing her again. "But, I think it's luckier that I get to look at you and the view at the same time, like that's miracle status." Phaedra couldn't help but laugh. "Right," Phaedra replied. They hung out on the couch for a few minutes before a knock on the door signaled their lunch. Phaedra realized that when Cal said sushi, he meant sushi. 3 sushi platters were brought in by cart. What Phaedra could only assume by mental math was probably $300 worth of food. Geez, she couldn't help but mutter the word when she sat in front of the platters and took it all in. "You don't have to eat it all." "Well, I hope not. It would take me 3 weeks. Cal laughed. "I think you could put some of it away. Try one of each or something." Phaedra looked around, not know which to start with. He helped her pick a few rolls and move them onto her plate before he started eating. Phaedra ate all 3 of her rolls before she said a word, her eyes bulging at the taste and quality of the meal. "Where did this come from?" "This is the best sushi I've ever tasted." Not that that was saying much, because Phaedra hardly ever splurged, and definitely not to that extent. "This Japanese chef I know, he's a personal chef and cooks for a couple of people I know." "Personal chef Cal, this is really expensive." Each piece of sushi was wrapped perfectly in the seaweed wrap, and not a grain of rice was out of place. Even the wasabi that decorated the edge and the ginger were in dancing designs around the edges of the platters. I wanted to treat you though, you deserve it. He's a friend now anyway, and we have a deal that I spread his name around town when I have business meetings, and he does things like this for me for cheap. It's really not too big of a deal. If you say so. She grabbed a few more rolls from the platter. Besides, the rest will go out into the break room and my employees will love me for an extra few days, so that's definitely worth it. I think. Oh yes, are you kidding? They'll love it. They continued eating for a few more minutes, before Phaedra confessed that she couldn't eat another bite, and Cal followed her soon after. She went with him to put the remaining food out in the break area, where about half a dozen interns swarmed the trays. Cal winked at Phaedra as they watched them go on and on, thanking him. Next, he took her through the building, introducing her to his employees and explaining how everyone had a role in the company. When they reached the other corner of the building, they noticed more and more stressed-out faces and a tenser environment. At one point Phaedra could hear a woman practically screaming at someone from behind a cracked open wooden door that was smaller, but similar to Cal's. The door read, Sophia Benson. Oh boy. We're already 3 days late because you screwed up and now you're telling me that you can't deliver. This is completely unacceptable, Travis. I don't know whose idea it was to hire you, but it was a bullshit call and I'm over it entirely. Get this job done, and then pack up your desk, I don't want to see you again. The roaring voice was very obviously Sophia's, and very obviously pissed. Cal's face contorted into one of pain and embarrassment as he glanced back at Phaedra, who offered him a pitted look. Hold on a second, he said as the wood door swung open and a skinny young man practically ran out. Phaedra couldn't tell, but by the head and the hands motion, she figured he was in tears. Cal looked towards the young man and grimaced before walking into the office and letting Phaedra follow him. Sophia, what the hell was that? He asked angrily, something Phaedra had never seen from him before. Phaedra walked in just in time to see Sophia look up, horrified, angry and embarrassed and fuming when she saw Phaedra. What the hell is she doing here? She asked. Well, I was giving her a tour of the office, and our last stop just so happened to be firing one of our best interns, so naturally, we had to stop in. Forget her, you aren't allowed to fire anyone. You don't have that authority. You're in charge of the interns, because you're supposed to be teaching them and honing them to be as good as you, not as miserable as you. Excuse me, Calvin, you don't get to come in here dragging your flavor of the week through the halls and bossing people around. I hate to remind you, but you wouldn't have this company if it weren't for me, so just remember that. If I want to fire a useless intern, I will. Cal was angry, extremely angry. Phaedra could tell by the warm flush across the back of his neck in front of her. He stood tall and tense, unlike his usually casual but collected self. She wasn't sure how to take the flavor of the week comment. Again, her list of red flags from Calvin was getting longer and longer, and she wondered how long she'd actually put up with it before she called it quits. Was he really worth all this drama and self-doubt she was putting herself through? Probably not. I'm not going to have this argument with you right now, I don't have the energy. But I can tell you this. You know how grateful I am that you motivated me to start this company. I am. But that is where I draw the line. You never put $1 in and only did the work which it turns out you're extremely good at when I begged you or you found something to get out of it. That's it. So, we're all going to need you to get your act together and deal with the problems with maturity and professionalism instead of whatever it was that just exploded in here and tried to take out the intern before I walked in. Sophia tried to speak, but he cut her off. I'm serious. I don't want to hear it, I have to walk Phaedra out. We can have this discussion later. With that, he turned on his heels and followed Phaedra out of the office. They walked silently to the elevators, and Calvin waited to speak until the door shut behind them. God, I'm so sorry, that was so rude and unprofessional of her. Phaedra wondered if he was so oblivious to forget how she treated her the first day they met at the taco truck. No, it's fine, problems at work bring out the worst in people, happens to me sometimes. Why was she still trying to be nice? Yeah, I guess, but it's unacceptable. Anyway, you were the highlight of my day. Thank you so much for coming, I had a lot of fun. Me too, she said and leaned in to kiss him. What was supposed to be a quick kiss on the lips turned into a full 14-story makeout session in which no one got on the elevator, which Phaedra found relatively surprising. Cal's fingertips teased the area between her legs and near her butt, which was exposed as her purple dress slid up in the commotion of contact. As the elevator slowed, Cal pulled away and let Phaedra straighten her skirt. She wished for a second that he'd have done that in his office so that they could have had sex on that amazing couch looking out over the city. The area between her legs throbbed as they exited the elevator. Cal's driver was waiting at the door and Cal walked her towards him. Seeing a restroom sign to her right and needing to compose herself, she stated, "I'm going to use the restroom, thank you so much for lunch. It was delicious and so fun to see where you work. It's amazing what you created, it really is." She smiled and let him kiss her once again. "Of course, I'm glad you were able to come. Text me when you get back to work," he said with a smile. She waved goodbye and headed into the restroom where she peed and quickly washed her hands. She took a second to check her makeup in the mirror, which had only slightly smudged in the last few hours and required only a little bit of maintenance. As she was rummaging through the makeup bag in her purse, she heard the door open and glanced up into the mirror only to be greeted by Sophia's angry face. "Who the hell do you think you are?" she asked. It was at this point that Phaedra no longer found humor in the girl's crazy obsession with Cal, it was now weird and creepy. "Did you follow me in here?" "So what if I did?" "I needed to tell you girl, that you should stay away from Cal. He picks random street urchins, the word burned in Phaedra's mind, and adopts them, fucking them and making them look like idiots before he dumps them, claiming that he's too passionate about his work to take the right amount of time for them. He's done it a dozen times, and he'll keep doing it, so just do yourself a favor and leave, before he does." "And where do you fall into this? You're not an urchin?" "No, I'm the classy, hard-working one that he keeps coming back to when he realizes he can't find the perfect woman in the club or wherever he found you." "A children's clothing store," Phaedra said calmly, trying to lower her blood pressure. She thought of the only thing that could make Sophia feel like an idiot. "Excuse me. He found me in a children's clothing store. It's a boutique, and I work there. I helped him shop for his niece, and that was that. I was here today to have lunch and talk about starting a contract with Queens. We need a media presence, and you guys are the experts." Sophia was busy trying to figure out if she believed Phaedra, but in the meantime, her face contorted into one of plain embarrassment. "But since I've seen your absolutely unprofessional outbursts 3 times today, I think I might chance it and take my business elsewhere." "Such a shame." Sophia tried to force the words, but they didn't work, they came out flat and irritated. "Goodbye, Sophia." Phaedra walked out of the bathroom and quickly to her driver, who was in the same spot waiting for her. She let him lead her to the car, where she practically collapsed into the back seat. She fought off tears as they pulled away from the building. An exhausting experience, and one filled with so much hostility from a woman she hardly knew that she wondered if there had to be some truth to the stories she told. Why else would a woman be so obsessed with a man, if he hadn't done something wrong to her? What if she'd been one of his women and was now living to prevent anyone else from being with him? Phaedra also considered the possibility that the delivery was wrong, but the message was true. Did he bring a different woman to his office frequently to have lunch and show off to his office? There was no way for her to know, and she didn't want to worry about it. Even if she pretended not to hear what Sophia had said, she would still have to deal with that impossible woman. And obviously, given their lunch date at the taco truck, he spent more time with her than just at work. Phaedra thought about the other things that concerned her, the money spending and the fact that an interracial relationship took so much work. She remembered the way the woman at the front desk looked her up and down with disgust in her eyes. The negative thoughts flooded her so much that she felt she was drowning when the car pulled up at Elite Boutique. She thanked the driver and let him help her out of the car. She took a deep breath before the man drove away, promising herself that she would leave the negativity and pain that the lunch had brought out inside the car. Instead, if Candace asked, she'd tell her about the delicious lunch, amazing view, and the hot make-out session in the elevator. All three of those things she'd be glad to remember forever. Unfortunately, doubt had a way of taking up residence long before the happy memories did, and she was its next victim. Chapter 7. Cal was an overeager texter, he began to realize. He'd send a message to Phaedra, and with no response, he'd send a few more, and maybe a funny gif he thought would ease the awkwardness of so many messages. The stream of consciousness way of thinking was the same when he spoke and when he typed. It was all over the place. It was especially made worse when he was nervous or attracted to the person he was texting, meaning his correspondence with Phaedra was a disaster. Her short answers sometimes left him thinking she was mad or irritated with him, both of which made no sense to him. They got along well. Sure, they both had a lot going on, and she wasn't sure exactly where she wanted the relationship to go, but they agreed to enjoy their time together until one or both of them were ready to consider getting serious. Until then, Cal was content with spending as much time with Phaedra as she would let him. They texted each other all the next day, until the following morning when Cal told Phaedra he would be in the neighborhood signing the lease for Queen's new space. Cal: "Hey babe, I'm signing on that spot down the block from you this afternoon. Mind if I stop in and say hi? I've got a surprise for you." Phaedra: "Sure. Sounds great. Good luck." He'd seen a beautiful diamond necklace in the window of a jewelry store the day before and couldn't resist buying it for Phaedra. He noticed that she loved jewelry but didn't wear that many pieces, so he thought he would help add to her collection. He debated back and forth at the counter between the extravagant piece with multiple diamonds and the more simple 3-diamond setting. He opted for the simpler, classier version because as he got to know Phaedra, he learned that she didn't need expensive things like Sophia did. She'd constantly guilt him into buying her something. Phaedra wasn't that way. Instead, she'd either buy it for herself if she really wanted it or she'd go without. It was as simple as that. He also had a special plan for this necklace. He intended to officially ask her to be his date to a banquet for all of the top media groups in Atlanta and some of their most prestigious clients. He wanted the occasion to be special, and he had hopes that she would agree to be his official girlfriend that night. The storefront he was renting was across the street and through a small alley from Phaedra's store. Cal couldn't say he wasn't slightly motivated by that fact when deciding which store to rent, but ultimately this one was the best fit for his company. He took the afternoon to sign the lease with the rental agent and then started thinking about the layout of the space. It was an open floor plan with 2 back rooms, similar to Phaedra's store. In his mind, he had the image of 2 front desks, one with a register, and the back was a studio and design area where clients and employees could sit and discuss plans for their projects. It should be an area that supported creativity and collaboration, which were 2 fundamental values of his company. He imagined couches and long tables, a few screens to blow up the proofs for each project. It was the opposite of what they had now, which was a phone or online request for a service, possibly a phone call if the contract was big enough, and then the product was sent. It was less than ideal. This space would allow him to connect with his customers and achieve the mutualism he was looking for. He sketched a couple of plans on the notepad that he'd brought with him, and at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, he decided to head over to Elite Boutique. The walk took less than 10 minutes, and although the small alleyway was creepy, Cal figured he could get used to the walk. He wasn't planning on moving his office into the storefront, however he was planning to work from there a few days a week. It would give him the opportunity to interact with customers and ensure that his employees were doing their jobs. He opened the door to Phaedra's shop and saw that she was busy with a few customers. He winked at her when she looked up and smiled at him. Looking around, he saw a few sparkling dresses he knew Ruby would love and began to flip through them to occupy his time. After 10 minutes, Phaedra rang up the family and escorted them to the door. "Hey there," Cal said as he wrapped her in an embrace and planted a kiss on her lips. "How are you?" Good, she replied. How did everything go with the lease? Went well, everything's signed and I have the keys. Cal patted a jingling set of keys in his right pocket. I have something for you. Really? The look on her face was one of hesitation, but curiosity. He nodded and pulled the velvet box out from under his arm. Now, this is just a gift. No strings attached except that you have to let me cook dinner for you tonight. Wow, you're cooking? She asked, interested. Hell yeah, I am. He handed her the box and watched as she opened it. Her eyes grew large and her head tilted slightly, which concerned him a little bit. Do you like it? She fingered the 3 circular diamonds that met in the middle of the chain. It's beautiful, but Cal, it's too much. I can't dash. Yes you can, and I picked that one out specifically because I know you don't like gaudy stuff. But I thought it was beautiful and like I said, have dinner with me, and the gift will make more sense. There's more to it, should I say? He had a mischievous grin on his face, one that she wasn't reciprocating. More to it? She asked, still staring at the diamonds. Can you just trust me and let me explain tonight? Please. This was not going the way he'd expected, but that was one thing he was starting to love about Phaedra. She was never what he expected, and that made it so much more exciting. She forced a smile after a few seconds and closed the box. Okay, I'll trust you. Thank you for the necklace, it's beautiful. She looked like she had more to say, but she held it in. He kissed her again and the ring of the store doorbell moved him away. I'll let you go, dinner tonight though. I'll pick you up. Actually, send me the address, I'll drive. I have a couple of errands after work. You sure? She nodded and kissed him, pushing him towards the door. I'll see you then. Phaedra did not have errands to do after work. Instead, she wanted to be able to get away when she told him she couldn't accept the necklace or him if he kept trying to buy her with gifts like that. It wasn't that she wasn't appreciative, but it was too early and too much. Like the ex that just bought her gifts, to distract her from what was going on under her nose. It made her uneasy and made her struggle to trust him, which was not what either of them wanted so early in the relationship. Cal had sent her the address, though she had a rough idea of where to go from the first night they were together. Luckily, it was on the side of the city closest to her house, so she had time to run home and change into something a little more casual. Her home was small and had been purchased from her grandmother years ago. It was in a middle to low-class neighborhood and a place that she didn't want Cal to see. She wasn't ashamed of it because she had purposefully decided to stay there where she could live and save enough money to buy or rent an apartment in the city. She had drawn out the plan years ago when she'd first started working for Candace, and now that she was months away from running her own store, she was close to moving out. But the house was a part of her history and her family. And while she wasn't ashamed of it, she knew that bringing Cal there would change the way they saw each other and worsen the problems they were already having. She dressed quickly before getting back in the car with her night bag just in case and driving to his condo. Cal buzzed her in and she took the elevator to his top-floor condo. She knocked on the door and received and it's open, from inside. She walked in to find Cal in the kitchen, shirtless and chopping vegetables. Hey, he exclaimed when he saw her. I'm glad I opted for casual, Phaedra joked as she approached him and wrapped her arms around his naked sides. His muscles were taut and his skin was perfect. Oh yeah. I'll put a shirt on before we eat, don't worry. He kissed her and went back to the vegetables. So what are we having? She asked, snooping into the pots and pans strewn about on the stove. A chicken pasta dish my mom used to make me when I was younger. Just forewarning you though, I'm not the best. But I do like to cook, not much time to practice though. Well good, I'm looking forward to trying it. Can I help you with anything? Nah, not really. Maybe stir the sauce? She did as he asked, checking on the sauce and stirring every few seconds to make sure it wasn't burning. It smelled amazing, a combination of spices and mushrooms. It seemed to be a marsala-type sauce, which made her excited. A timer rang somewhere and she moved out of the way so that Cal could check whatever was ready. He pulled out the chicken, which had been cooked to perfection, and set it on top of the stove. She stepped back and started sipping on a glass of wine he'd prepared for her and watched as he finished preparing the dish. He put the noodles that had been boiling on the stove through a colander and then poured them on top of the chicken. Next, he added the fresh vegetables he'd just finished cooking and put them in with the noodles. Lastly, he poured the sauce over everything and covered it with foil. So that just needs to bake for a few more minutes, and then we're good. Awesome. He ran around for a few minutes setting the table and refilling their wine. They chatted about their days and more details about both of their future expansions. As it turned out, Phaedra's new store would be opening in a South Atlanta location that was closer to his Queens headquarters. The irony of them both expanding their companies to the other's location was not lost on them. After 20 minutes, Cal pulled the dish out of the oven and spooned 2 heaping servings onto their plates. They sat down at the table and proceeded to eat. "This is delicious," remarked Phaedra after eating 3 bites without taking a breath. "Good. Yeah, family recipe. When do you have time to shop for all this?" she asked. His face looked guilty. "Actually, I wrote the items down on a list and had one of the interns pick it up for me. But I promise I know how to grocery shop. I just get really flustered after going and I wanted to be in good shape for this dinner. Not freaking out like a weirdo." Phaedra laughed. They continued eating for a while until they were both almost finished and Cal began to speak. "Okay, so I told you there was more to the necklace, right?" "Yeah," she looked anxious. "Well, there's this big media dinner where all the top media companies and some of their biggest clients get together and have a big party. It's a big deal and a great chance for me to get my name out there. So I was hoping that you'd be my date." His delivery was much too chipper, Phaedra thought as she considered his offer. Here was a man who clearly was into her. However, every time she considered getting serious with him, he would buy her an expensive gift or she'd be reminded that men lie and use money to cover up their infidelities. And while she wasn't sure yet who Calvin was, she thought she was starting to get to know him. She thought about the necklace. "So, why did you buy me the necklace?" "'Cause I thought you could wear it to the dinner, with a nice dress or something." He probably didn't mean for it to sound chauvinistic, but it did. She rubbed her head in her hands. "Wait, what's wrong?" "It's too expensive. And you know that, and you also know that I don't like things like that. I don't need you to pay to pretty me up enough to show off on your arm at some fancy function. That's not me." He looked hurt as he pushed his plate away from him. "I thought you'd be happy to go out and have fun and dress up. I don't understand what the problem is. I'll take back the necklace if that's really the issue. But you're going to have to let me buy you gifts sometimes. It's not the necklace, it's what the necklace represents. Maybe you think that I need it to be elevated enough to come to your fancy dinner. I don't know, maybe you just bought it from me to distract me from what's really going on." There was a knock at the door. Cal's face showed that he was very obviously overwhelmed. "Hold on. No, that's not it. Neither of those things are it." The knocking continued. "Hold on," he yelled towards the door. "I really just wanted to take out the girl I like to my work function. That's it, Faye, you need to believe me." He stood up and started walking towards the door, but he maintained eye contact with her the whole time. From the table, Phaedra could see directly into the hall when he opened the door. And somehow, Phaedra wasn't shocked to see Sophia standing at the door carrying 2 bags of Chinese takeout from the much Americanized and very expensive Chinese restaurant downtown. "Hey," came her shrill voice. "Jesus, Sophia, what are you doing here?" "I'm in the middle of something." Phaedra didn't wait to deal with Sophia or the rest of her conversation with Cal. She grabbed her night bag and purse and pushed past them both at the door. "Phaedra, wait." Cal called after her. He only hesitated for a second before chasing after her to the elevator, leaving the door to his apartment wide open and Sophia standing there with the Chinese. He slipped into the elevator right as the door started to close, and he immediately pressed the emergency stop button. "Don't do that," Phaedra insisted, trying to access the button, but Calvin blocked her. "No, we aren't going anywhere until we clear this up." "Clear what up, Cal?" "Nothing is going on. We just had sex a couple times and had a few meals together. What else is there?" Pain showed clearly on his face. "Are you kidding? There's a lot more going on between us than just that. You were there that night when we were first together. That was amazing. Our connection is real. I get it if you're scared, I do. But please don't let that stop you from pursuing a real relationship." She gazed at him, wondering what she was doing in an elevator with him, and why she couldn't have just stayed away from him to begin with. "Cal, I'm tired, I want to go home. I don't want to fight with you. Honestly, I don't care enough to do that. I told you how I feel about people throwing their money around, and yet you do it anyway. I told you I've been hurt before and lied to, and here you are with this woman who continuously shows up. She's everywhere. And she told me that you pick women like me to be with all the time, and it never lasts. Don't listen to her, she's just an angry ex. That's literally her job, to slander my name around town. And she's good at it. I've never brought a woman to my office, and I surely haven't taken anyone through each department and introduced them to my employees. I have dated other women, but they don't usually take interest in my business, which was typically the deciding factor when our relationships ended. Okay, she's your ex. How come you never once mentioned that to me? Not when she dragged you away from me at the taco truck, or when she threw the tantrum in your office the other day. You hid things like that from me. Hell, you didn't tell me Ruby wasn't your daughter until the third time we met, yet you flirted with me every time. You were the one that wanted to take it slow and just have fun. I figured bringing Sophia up would make it the opposite of fun, but I guess that's my fault." He let out an exhausted breath and started the elevator again. "My invitation to the dinner still stands." The elevator doors opened and Phaedra walked out towards 502B. She didn't say a word or turn back to look at him. "Please think about it," he yelled after her. She hopped into the car and drove out of the parking garage quickly, glancing back only a second to see him standing there blankly watching her drive away. The tears didn't start until she pulled into her own driveway, and even then she fought them, letting them break loose before reeling them in seconds later and cursing herself for being that weak. She didn't like to be the woman that threw a tantrum over a necklace or a party or even another woman, but her instincts were different now. They were heightened, and every incident that slightly reminded her of a cheating ex turned into an ordeal. She hated it and hated the way it made her treat others. She hated that prior to Kevin she would have taken a woman like Sophia and stomped her into the ground. She wouldn't have let the words she spoke take root inside her brain, and she surely wouldn't have accused someone of something based solely on the words of a jealous ex. But Cal was to blame for some of it. For being an idiot and not telling her the truth about his and Sophia's past. That would have made it easier for Phaedra to ignore her. He was also to blame for throwing money at her, although she began to consider that maybe his past girlfriends had asked that of him and he was used to it. She knew, deep down, that it truly was a sign that he cared about her, but she still didn't know how to accept it. She wiped away her tears before she exited the car. She'd promised her grandmother that she would never feel sorry for herself in that house. Her grandmother claimed that feeling sorry for yourself was the most toxic and worthless emotion, and that if you managed to let it into your home it would never leave. And because of that, Phaedra stood outside wiping away her tears and calming herself down before walking inside. She didn't know the right way to handle everything that had been thrown at her, but what she did know was that she had good opportunities heading her way at work, and if she stayed focused on that she might be able to gain back the confidence she'd lost. And only then would she be able to pursue a relationship. Chapter 8. "She's not here, sorry," an apologetic Candace said over the phone. Phaedra hadn't answered a single text message over the weekend, and now she wasn't at work, or at least that's what Candace told him. Regardless, it was clear that Phaedra had little interest in speaking with Cal after their blow-up at his condo. "Do you know when she'll be in?" Cal waited for a response, but the woman was quiet. After a while she stated, "I'm not sure. I mentioned that she could work from home, prepping for our new store, so I'm sure that's what she's doing." "So she's at home. Can you tell me where that is?" Cal knew he wasn't going to get the answer he wanted on that one, but figured it was a good try. "Now Calvin, you know I can't give you her address. All I can do is call you the next time she comes in. If it's space she wants, maybe you should give it to her. She's been through a lot, you know." Cal let out an exhausted sound. "I know, Candace, I know. I'll figure something else out, thanks for your help." Calvin hated this. He hated the fact that some asshole had ruined Phaedra's happiness. Not only her happiness with himself, but also with other men in the future. He didn't like that his every action was judged twice as hard because of what Phaedra's ex did to her. He understood it and he felt for her, but he didn't think it was fair. He knew he couldn't say that to her, but he needed to find a way to contact her to tell her he wasn't going anywhere. That he thought she was worth the wait and he was willing to do it. After hanging up the phone, he wallowed at his desk, thinking on how he could get through to her in the next few days before Friday's party. His brain whirred a mile a minute before he remembered something. Travis. The intern. He remembered his resume said something about interning in the investigation unit of his hometown sheriff's department. Why not? What did he have to lose at this point? Travis, he pressed the buzzer after dialing the appropriate desk extension. "Hello?" "Hello," came a scrawny voice on the other end of the line, clearly unsure of how to use the intercom system given that Sophia was quite partial to yelling directly from her office. "It's Calvin. Can you come to my office? It's important. And don't tell Sophia." "Yes, sir, be right there, sir," came the obedient response. A few short minutes later a quiet knock landed on his door. "Come in." The sight of Travis always made Calvin smile, because he reminded him a lot of himself when he was younger. "Close the door, take a seat." The kid sat in front of him and he immediately tucked his hands under his legs in an unfortunate nervous habit. "First of all, calm down a little bit. You aren't in trouble. In fact, I need your help. And I need you to be relaxed enough to help me out and get done what I need you to do." Travis removed his hands from underneath his legs. "Yes, sir. And stop calling me sir. Okay, listen. If I recall correctly, you worked at the sheriff's department in high school? Right? Doing some kind of online investigation?" "Yes," replied Travis. "Okay, and how competent are you in those abilities now?" Travis offered up an unsure look, but tilted his head in interest. "I mean, I'm probably a little rusty, but I still know the basics, or know who would." "Why? What do you need me to investigate?" "A girl." Travis immediately perked up. "Really? Really? What kind of girl? Like girlfriend, a potential girlfriend, sister?" Calvin was actually appreciative for the distraction from his situation with this kid whose biggest problem seemed to be whether or not Sophia would burn him with her devil horns. "Potential girlfriend? I don't know, we were seeing each other and I kind of screwed up and her past makes her have a hard time trusting people so she shut me out, but I want to take her to this party Friday but she won't answer my calls and I at least want to send her something." You just rambled to your 22-year-old intern, he shook his head at himself. "Wow. Yes. So can you help me?" "Sure, what do you need?" "I need her address and I need to have a package delivered there, and I need confirmation that she's received it." "Okay, but you know even if she receives it that doesn't necessarily mean she'll open it. Especially if it's from you and she's mad at you." "Wow, thank you, Travis. Think of something will you?" Travis thought for a while. "Okay, I'll come up with something. I can do it. Today." "Sheesh, that's kind of short notice. How about tomorrow?" "Delivered tomorrow." "Fine. That's good. Get it done. Calvin turned back to his computer, but Travis remained seated. I need her name, Mr. Dennison, and any and all information you have on her. Right. Okay, I'm going to send it to you on the private server. Don't open it in front of anyone, okay? This is just between you and me. I can trust you, right? Absolutely, Mr. Dennison. I'm glad to help. Excellent. Make it happen. Phaedra was so thankful to Candace for letting her work from home for a few days. Given what had happened at Calvin's apartment, she didn't want to chance running into him and caving to his charms like she had such a bad habit of doing. She'd been vague when she told Candace and asked for some time at home. She mentioned that there had been an argument and it had opened up old wounds and pains that she'd experienced after Kevin left. And Candace understood because she was the one that had been there for Phaedra when everything happened with Kevin. Listen, I don't know what's going on between you and Calvin, but he seems like a really nice guy and I know he's into you. Now, maybe he's just a master manipulator, but if not, you should take the time to figure out your feelings. Figure out if they're truly red flags or if these are just feelings you haven't gotten over since the breakup, she'd said when Phaedra had called her the night before she was due into work. Take some time. Stay home, work on yourself and your plans for the new store, that's your baby. And then maybe you'll come to some realization after that. Phaedra had hesitantly agreed to do so, but only after promising to have all of the budget and order plans complete and ready for submission after her staycation. While working on the budget, she did allow herself time to think about what Candace had said. Were all these hesitations towards Cal all remnants of pain and distrust left from Kevin? Most of her wanted to say yes. And hopefully, with a few therapy sessions and a focus on herself, Phaedra thought she could get past it. No way would she let Kevin ruin her future with Cal or anyone else just because he messed up. However, if the hesitations were not because of Kevin, she didn't know how she could get past it with Cal. Once you distrusted someone, it was hard to truly ever trust them again. She had to admit that she and Cal had skipped a lot of the time two people usually took to get to know each other and had gone straight to having sex and fending off ex-girlfriends, so that may have complicated things. A knock on her door brought her out of her own thoughts. She wondered who would be at her door at 10 o'clock in the morning and considered that maybe it was a delivery. She stood up and walked towards the door, and through the window she saw a young man wearing a helmet and carrying a backpack. A bike messenger? She wasn't even sure they still existed. She opened the door and a smiling face greeted her. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am, I have a package for you. I need you to sign for it." "From who?" Phaedra asked. "Not sure, ma'am, this is a third-party delivery. All I know is that it's considered a perishable item and will need to be opened immediately upon receipt." Perishable item? You've got to be kidding me, who is messing with me right now, she thought. Yes, ma'am, perishable. So food, probably. How do we both know it's not a bomb or anthrax or something? The kid laughed. I just deliver the packages, ma'am. Whoever receives those does a confirmation of the content and the items are checked for your safety. Phaedra had had enough of this. Fine, just give it to me. She signed on the line and took the package from him. Carrying it back inside, she set it on the table next to where she'd been doing her work. She stared at it for half an hour before she finally broke down and inspected the box. There wasn't a single label on it except the one that said her name and the other three that marked the contents as perishable. She shook it lightly before ripping open the tape. Inside the box was a clear Tupperware container, and inside were a dozen cupcakes. Each one was frosted in a different shade of purple. The frosting job was subpar, and Phaedra wondered who had done it. She noticed a gray envelope to the side of the cupcakes, and she pulled it out. It was addressed to Phaedra. She opened the envelope and found a blank card which contained a handwritten message. Phaedra. I know this might be corny, but I made you these cupcakes by a Googled recipe which also included a bonus recipe on how to make ombre-styled icing. Hint: you ice one, then add 2 drops of food coloring, then ice another, then add more food coloring. Kinda cool actually. Anyway, I made these because I wanted to send you 1,000 gifts when it dawned on me, that's not what you want. I don't know why it took me so long to realize that, but I did. I never meant for it to seem like I was buying your affection, I just wanted to show you I cared. So, please accept these cupcakes and consider still being my date to the media dinner. I'm not going to lie and say that I don't want to show you off, I do. I think you're beautiful and funny and smart and driven and amazing, and I want everyone else to see that and be jealous of me. Of us, for being happy together. But with that being said, I won't do that if you don't want me to. I need time to learn more about you, to learn what you like and don't like, but I promise I will start listening and keep listening. I know you're still upset with me, I understand. But I'd like to see you. Or could you at least text me to tell me you're okay? I miss spending time with you, it was a really fun week. Call me. My bathtub is lonely without you. Love, Cal. Phaedra let out a sigh, partially of emotional drain and the rest was of relief. He got it. Or at least he seemed to understand. But that made her decision all the more difficult. She knew what needed to be done. She went to her refrigerator and in the back of the top shelf there was her most expensive bottle of wine. This was the one she saved for special occasions or when disaster struck. She popped the top, grabbed one stemless wine glass, the box of cupcakes and the letter and moved to the couch. She turned on whichever Food Network show was on and turned up the volume. It took 4 of the cupcakes and the entire bottle of wine for Phaedra to decide she would indeed go to the party. But she still needed time away from Cal before that so that she could get her head in the right place. She typed out a text to him, she was drunk but tried to sound professional and serious. I got your cupcakes. I will come to the party, but I need some time before then. If you send me the address of the party, I will meet you there, we can talk then. Let me know if that works for you. She wondered if it was too lacking in emotion, if she sounded like a bitch. Moments later her phone buzzed. Perfect. I'm so glad to hear it. 120 Southern Ridgeway. I'll see you there, beautiful. She rolled her eyes at how even his short and sweet text messages were still perfect. She finished watching the episode and about 3 more just like it before she locked up the house, turned off all the lights and headed to bed. Thursday was a long day. Phaedra's to-do list included getting her hair redone, getting a wax, her nails done, and shopping for a formal dress for the media ball of the century, or at least that's how her research into the party made it look. When Cal said some of the top clients of these media companies were coming to the party, he didn't mention they would be CEOs of companies like Facebook, GM, Macy's, and even a few top universities that utilized media companies to better their image. It was more than a party, it was a gala. And the dress code was black tie, which Cal did not mention. Thursday night a moment of panic struck her. What if he doesn't know? And why didn't he tell me? She scribbled a text message to him. Phaedra, hey, did you know this was a black tie thing tomorrow night? Cal, yes. Is everything okay? I have a tux, don't worry, I won't embarrass you. Phaedra, you didn't tell me. Luckily, I googled it to know what kind of dress I should wear. I was worried you didn't know. Cal, 1, you're the most beautiful woman I know, they'd let you in a potato sack. 2, you're a Googler, it's what you do the second you don't know something or you're nervous and want to double check. I knew you would find out on your own. Cal, it's one of my favorite things about you. Phaedra obviously hadn't meant for this conversation to turn into a relationship discussion, but she smiled at the fact that he did know her. Just a couple of small things, but they mattered nonetheless. Phaedra, all right. You're right, thank you for letting me figure it out on my own, and thank you for having a suit so you don't embarrass me. Phaedra, I'm sure you're gonna look sexy as hell in that suit. The last message was unnecessary, but it made her feel better. Cal, see you tomorrow. He used his favorite winky face emoji, to which she sent the big smile with teeth. She would be glad if they were able to work things out, she enjoyed even the shortest conversations she had with him. Friday, Phaedra went into work for a few hours to discuss some of her progress with the new store budget with Candace. She informed her boss that she was going to a fancy party with Cal. A fancy party, huh? That's exciting. Have you guys worked out all of your problems? Candace asked inquisitively. We're getting through them, I think. I think we just need time to get to know each other better and learn how to communicate, and I need to continue to heal from my breakup with Kevin. Candace nodded in understanding. Well, it sounds like you're working through it. Party tonight, right? Yeah. Well, get out of here, you're representing us tonight and I don't want you looking sloppy because you were here instead of getting ready. Let me know if you need anything. Good luck. Phaedra picked up her dress at a tailor down the block from their store. The woman there had kindly agreed to do a last-minute alteration on the dress she'd found for the gala. It was a wine-colored floor-length gown that had gold embellishments at the top. One of the reasons that she'd picked this dress was because of the neckline, which was perfect on its own without any necklace to adorn it, but if you did happen to have the perfect diamond necklace to go with it, it would look that much better. After all the arguing about the necklace, she knew that Cal had given it to her out of the goodness of his heart, and that he would be so happy to see her wearing it. She took the dress home and hung it up, spending the next couple of hours relaxing, sipping on wine and doing her makeup. It had been a long time since she'd had a reason to get dressed up and she'd missed it. She was excited and nervous to see Cal given that they hadn't seen each other in person since the argument that night almost a week ago. She hoped she hadn't made a mistake in agreeing to go and thought that as long as she could get enough wine in her, she could enjoy herself. Finally, at about 5:30, she slid on the dress and her gold heels. Her hair was tied half up with a matching gold clip, and her makeup had the faintest gold highlights. She smiled at herself in the mirror, at how much she'd grown in the months leading up to this moment. She had a lot of growing left to do, but she hoped that tonight would be a step forward in the right direction. She took another moment to admire the necklace, the one that had caused her stomach to churn and doubt the authenticity of Calvin's character. It truly was beautiful and simple in all the right ways. And based on his letter, he'd picked it out because of that. She never expected a man to be able to read her mind. All she asked was that he try to listen and remember, though she knew it would take a lifetime to learn everything about someone. Chapter 9. The Uber dropped her off right in front of the museum in which the gala was taking place. She thanked the driver and stepped out onto the carpeted sidewalk. There were a few people walking in groups up the steps towards the front of the museum. Phaedra experienced a slight moment of panic until she saw a familiar face halfway up the steps. He didn't notice her at first, but as she took a few steps, with her dress hiked up enough to not trip, he came running towards her. God, you look amazing. He wrapped her in a tight hug and kissed her cheek, before helping her up the steps. Thank you, you look great as well. I knew you'd look sexy in a tux. She wasn't wrong. He looked taller and stronger and sexier than she'd ever seen him look before. But more importantly, he looked free. He hopped a little when he got excited, and it was really cute. Wow, Faye. That necklace. It looks amazing on you, it truly does. Thank you, she replied, letting her hand slide lightly up her neck to touch the diamonds. I'm sorry for being unappreciative, I didn't mean to. I just got scared. Hey, it's okay, he said, bringing her in closer. I understand now, and I want to keep making it right. Want to go inside? They have an open bar. Yes, absolutely. He guided her up the steps carefully and through the large set of open doors into the lobby area, which then curved into the main ballroom. Before they entered the ballroom, he pulled her aside. Listen, I don't really have anything to do with this thing, I just need to talk to a few people. You don't have to stay with me, obviously, I mean you shouldn't. But what I'm trying to say is that I just need to do a couple things, and then we should meet somewhere and talk. Actually talk. Because I want to leave here knowing whether or not you'll be my girlfriend. Phaedra was a little surprised at the comment, but she kept a straight face. Okay. After dinner? Perfect. Much better to do these things on a full stomach. He winked at her and grabbed her hand, pulling her towards the bar. They each got a drink and began walking around the area, chatting with various people Cal knew. He'd introduce her as Phaedra Witten, manager of Elite Boutique Atlanta, and she smiled each time. She loved that he didn't introduce her as his friend or his girlfriend, but instead she was a business person here surrounded by a bunch of other business people who were looking to network. Surprisingly, people didn't stare at the sight of a white man and black woman walking arm in arm around the room. Instead, the moment she stepped away from him she got compliments on how good they looked together. A couple of times he would get busy talking business with someone and she would lightly tap him on the back and walk away. She took quite a few laps on her own, keeping a full drink in her hand and a smile on her face the entire time. Even from across the room, Cal's eyes would find her and he'd smile apologetically for talking so much. Eventually, people began to shift and servers carrying plates came out of the kitchen and began to set them down on the tables around the room. Phaedra casually began scanning the tables for name cards. After a few moments, Cal came up behind her, sliding one hand around her waist. "We're this way," he said, letting her loop one arm around his. They were sitting close to the stage at a table with two couples she didn't recognize. They introduced themselves as the developers of a social media platform designed to connect runners from around Georgia Run GA. A plaque on the table read Best New Media Group, 2018. "Are you up for an award?" Phaedra whispered in Cal's ear as they waited for the food to be served. "Oh yeah, I mean they do this award every year, whichever company is the best upcoming media group. There are at least a few other companies going for it at other tables around here probably. Some really cool ones too, like these guys who cater to people that are into fitness, but yeah. You could get it, you've worked really hard." He chuckled and rubbed her back lightly. "That's nice of you to say, but I don't know how likely it is. Our company has been around for 10 years at this point, though we haven't started having high-profile clients until last year and we've never been invited to this dinner before so it's possible. But regardless, it's nice to come and meet future clients and business partners." Phaedra smiled in agreement. After a few minutes, the meal was served: steak, potatoes, a small salad, and at the end a slice of cake served with coffee. During the meal, there were a few announcements and awards given for the largest donation and most community-oriented project. While everyone was sipping on their coffee and wine at the end of the meal, the award for Best Up-and-Coming Media Group was announced. Phaedra could sense Cal tensing slightly in his seat, as well as everyone else at the table. The crowd grew silent as the man in the suit on stage began to speak. Phaedra lightly squeezed Cal's arm in support. "And now we'd like to hand out the award for Best New Media Group. The nominees were those who have recently come into our circle and really shown that they can play with the biggest in media. If you remember, Facebook won this award in its early years. We celebrate all things media, those that act as a media platform and those that help companies find the outlet that is right for them. It's crucial to our survival in the age of technology. So, here it is. Your winner for Best New Media Group of 2018 is Queen's Media Group from right here in Atlanta, CEO Calvin Dennison." The audience clapped and Phaedra couldn't help but let out a few excited yelps. "Congrats," she leaned in and kissed Calvin on the cheek as a man in a suit came over and ushered him out of his chair and onto the stage. He looked back and offered Phaedra an excited but nervous glance. He made it up onto the stage and the small glass award was handed to him. "Wow," he started as the clapping died down. "I don't know what to say. I want to thank everyone who got us this far. You know, I was a young kid out of college, so probably 20 years ago when I got the idea for this company, and it took a long time for me to actually believe it was a possibility." He glanced at Phaedra for a moment and paused, a strange look on his face that she couldn't read, but then he continued. "A lot of the thanks should go to my girlfriend at the time, Sophia Benson. She was the one that told me I was capable of being great and growing my ideas and work into something as great as Queen's Media." He looked at Phaedra and smiled. She wasn't disappointed that he'd mentioned Sophia because she knew what he was saying was true. Sophia had been his inspiration in their 20s. She found instead that she was intrigued. The look on his face said that there was more. But it took me a long time to realize that I didn't need to be great, and my company didn't need to be well known. And although I'm so appreciative to be here and to win this award, I want to remind you all why we're actually here. Sure, we're the best at what we do, half the room that are those that specialize in media and advertising. And the other half are those that spend the most money and can make the most contact with the general public. But we shouldn't forget that we are the public. Our kids and our friends are the ones buying your products, and that our media outlets are being used to get to these products. It's more than just who makes the most money and who has the best product, it's about offering quality service that helps people. Jake and Angela, at my table, their app connects anyone around the city and the state that has a passion for fitness. Anyone from marathon runners to new moms who want to get out and away from the kids for a few hours. It's about community, and that's what I've tried to focus on with Queen's Media Group. And while I know that 20 years is a long time to go from having ideas in your girlfriend's kitchen and jotting them down on a napkin to standing here talking to you tonight, I'm more than appreciative for the journey I've taken. I look forward to working with some of you. He again looked at Phaedra, who was tearing up a little at his speech. And to a future that's full of new friendships and a lifetime of success, whatever that means to you. Thank you. The clapping was a little louder than before as he walked off the stage and back towards the table. Phaedra thought about how much bravery that speech took. A room full of wealthy business people were not likely to take well to a man who wanted to unite the community through technology, but it did seem to take. Jake and Angela smiled and kissed each other after shaking Cal's hand once more. That was great, Phaedra whispered in his ear as he took a seat. He kissed her on the cheek and turned back to the stage. A few more awards were handed out and a few more speeches were given. After they were complete, the audience was instructed to enjoy another cocktail hour in the reception area while the ballroom was transformed into a dance floor. Cal and Phaedra ordered a few drinks before continuing to schmooze with the other patrons. This time Cal was very popular and Phaedra was non-existent. Even as he tried to introduce her to whoever he was speaking with, another person or two would come up and interrupt, distracting him. He gave her worried and apologetic glances, but she smiled and shrugged it off. She did understand and tried not to find offense in the actions of others. Instead, she allowed herself to walk around the room and introduce herself to potential customers. "Hello, darling, don't you look beautiful in that wine color?" "Ugh, amazing," an elderly woman in a pink sequin gown said to her as they both stopped at one of the hors d'oeuvre trays. "Oh, thank you, from Savory Company right in downtown. I was so lucky to find it actually. I walked right by it on my way into work and I thought it would be perfect for tonight." "You thought right. Who are you working for?" The woman pulled her aside so they could speak. "Actually, I'm here with a friend, Calvin Dennison, with Queen's Media Group. But I actually run a children's clothing store downtown. You might not have heard of us, Elite Boutique. If you have children, you should look us up. We'll be expanding to South Atlanta next month." Phaedra thought for a second that Cal was rubbing off on her as her words flowed seamlessly out into the conversation. "Oh honey, I have grandchildren now, my children would never fit in your clothes." The two laughed together. "But I love the idea, my grandson loves dressing up, it's the cutest thing. We'll have to come by sometime." Phaedra fumbled in her purse for one of the 5 business cards she had haphazardly thrown in along with her lipstick. "Absolutely, here's our card. Come by any time, we'll find him something nice," she smiled at the woman. "What are you here in support of?" Phaedra asked. "Actually, I'm looking for a company to help my business. It was actually my husband's business, but he passed away 6 months ago and now I'm left solely in charge." "God, I'm sorry for your loss." "Oh thank you, actually he was my ex-husband. But no matter. I always disagreed with the way he ran the company, never thinking that the internet or even advertising at all would help. He was very word of mouth." "Ah, I see," replied Phaedra. So, I wanted to talk with a few people and see what my options were. What kind of company is it? Phaedra asked, intrigued. A taxi and chauffeur company, actually. One of the more trustworthy and safer options in the city, not to brag, she chuckled to herself. But, we started to fall off in recent years with the new Uber and Lyft. And I think that's what made Barton sick, in fact. So, I've hired a bunch of young people to help me spice up the business. We're doing all sorts of things online now, tracking the cars, registering the cars. Also, comparing public transportation time, we've been able to help customers decide what means of travel will be the best for them, even if it's not our cars. Wow, that sounds excellent. Very useful, Phaedra said. I think so too. But now I need to get us out there on social media platforms. Get above ground, above ground. The woman's pun made Phaedra smile, and they laughed together for a moment before thanking each other and parting ways. It was a familiar cackle that brought Phaedra's mind out of the conversation she was having with a man named Brett as she handed out her 4th business card and excused herself for the ladies' room. The cackle was Sophia's. Phaedra was amazed to see the woman hanging over Calvin in the corner of the room, surrounded by a group of men in suits. Sophia had a drink in her hand and would periodically move her hand from place to place on Cal's body. Phaedra watched, a snarl spreading across her face, as Sophia touched his stomach and arm. Phaedra let herself stand still, leaned quietly up against a wall, near them, but hidden. As she watched him try to remove her grasping hands without seeming rude or pushy in front of his colleagues, she realized what was going on. She could tell he was uncomfortable in Sophia's presence and that he wasn't at all interested in the public molestation that was occurring. She thought about everything that had happened up until this point, and it started to click. Calvin wasn't oblivious or stupid, and he wasn't a player. He was a grown man whose longtime business partner, ex-girlfriend, and probably still friend, was still in love with him. It was clear that he had fallen out of love a long time ago, probably when his passions shifted from making money to providing a service that could bring people together. And because he was such a gentleman and a truly good and honest man, he wouldn't get rid of her. Phaedra thought that maybe he should be more clear with her, but based on what she'd seen at his office that day, he wasn't afraid to tell Sophia the truth. So Phaedra continued to watch, wondering if this whole time she had been threatened by a woman that was so far off his radar that she was practically non-existent. He continued to move her hands away until eventually he pulled her aside, down into an inlet used for storing extra food and drinks. Phaedra moved quietly until she was at the wall adjacent from their meeting spot and she could hear what was being said. This was it, the moment of truth. And because of where she'd placed herself, Phaedra was going to find out if there was anything left between them. Because if it was going to culminate, surely it would be in a dark corner of a romantic reception hall. Sophia, stop it. What are you doing? What do you mean? I'm here supporting you and Queens. We won Best New Media, that's awesome. We're going to be getting so many more high-profile clients, this is literally going to skyrocket our company. Stop. First of all, I don't care if it skyrockets our business. Sure, I want us to be secure and have a great lineup of customers, but I don't care about these big names. I want good relationships that will last. Okay. The woman's voice twisted into a tone that made Phaedra's stomach flip. She had a way of making other people feel stupid and useless just by her tone of voice, and it was awful. Well, we can do that too, but why don't you want to make more money? I have plenty of money, more than I need. And that's not all it's about, soft, don't you get that? No, but that's fine. You can be the boring heart and soul of the company or whatever, and I'll be the one that brings in the famous and wealthy customers, making sure that we stay on top. Calvin let out an exhausted sigh and must have moved away from Sophia because Phaedra heard him from a different direction. You weren't supposed to be here, he hissed. I told you I was taking Phaedra as my date, how did you even get in here? Cal honey, I know half the people here, my dad plays golf with a lot of these guys. Anyways, that doesn't matter. I don't know why you're taking this Phaedra person so seriously. She's obviously not your type and it's never going to work out. You need someone like me on your arm, not her. She's gross. Phaedra surprised even herself when she bit back a laugh instead of an angry emotion. Sophia was pitiful and rude, and a guy like Calvin, the real Calvin, would never be with her. And although he was too nice to get rid of her, Phaedra was confident she had nothing to worry about. Instead, she thought she may have to worry about the woman poisoning her or slashing her tires if she stuck around long enough, but she knew she could handle that. She's not gross, what are you even talking about? Your jealousy is on a whole new level, and it needs to stop. We're business partners, and even that's a stretch. You do not get to decide who's in my life, and say rude things about the people I do decide to bring into it. I don't know what hold she has over you, maybe you feel like she's your charity case or something, but Sophia was clearly searching desperately for something that would strike him. Sophomore. His one word stopped her. Yeah? You need to leave. Now. I'm not going anywhere, Calvin, and you do well to appreciate me. I do appreciate you. I just said that in front of 1,000 people. What I don't appreciate is you talking shit about a woman I love. The word sent shivers across Phaedra's arms. Love? It was too soon for Cal to be in love with her, but in the silence of their conversation, she wondered if it was possible. Maybe it was too soon to be in love, but it was never too soon to start feeling love towards someone. She felt that for him right then as he defended her in front of such an evil person. Sophia cackled again. You do not love her. You don't get to tell me how I feel about her. Calvin's words got angrier and sped up. Phaedra is a better woman and probably business partner than you will ever be. She's hardworking, and no, she may not come from the family you did, but neither did I. She likes working hard, something you will never even experience. And she's been through a lot, which means at the end of the day she's had to fight to be where she is, including standing next to me. You've made it impossible for her. Don't think I didn't notice, or that Patty didn't tell me that your gossip reel at the front desk called you instead of her to pick up Phaedra that day for lunch. You're conniving and downright mean. Sophia's angry gasps could be heard where she tried to start defending herself, but couldn't get a word in. So, yes. You're going to leave right now, or at least get out of my sight. And you can think long and hard before Monday about whether or not you really want to be working at Queen's. If you do, then you'll get your act together and stay, if not you can pack your shit. Calvin, wait, he was gone, out into the room full of people who were starting to shift again towards the ballroom for dancing. Phaedra's heart was beating fast, so turned on from Calvin's words and so angry by Sophia's actions. She had two priorities at that moment, finding Calvin and showing him how much she wanted to be with him, and finding Sophia and ruining her day, possibly week. The conundrum was which to do first. Sophia took off after Calvin, which was a pretty bold move after what he'd just told her. Phaedra followed her into the ballroom where Calvin was clearly searching for his date. You come with me, right now. Phaedra pinched lightly at the white button-up shirt that fit perfectly on Calvin's athletic torso. Is everything okay? He asked, concerned. Oh, it will be, she murmured, pulling him right past a dumbfounded Sophia and out of the ballroom. In the reception area, a few groups of people were still choking down cocktails and laughing amongst themselves. Phaedra pulled Calvin past the area that was meant for the reception and down a hallway. She pulled on one door and found it locked. She pulled on a second and found a room that seemed to be used as a lab or teaching space. There were desks lined up in 2 rows, and 2 large tables at the front where Phaedra assumed the museum workers would demo artifacts and such. Whoa, whoa. What are we doing in here, Faye? Calvin stood close to the door, watching as Phaedra walked in and checked out the place. Phaedra, he said again after getting no response. What? What are we doing in here? The party is back that way and there's dancing. I don't want to dance, she said with a plain look on her face. Okay. Then what do you want to do? I want to talk, and then I want to fuck you on this table. His eyes widened and he looked at her. Hold on, wait. We do need to talk, but I heard you talking to Sophia. I heard what you said, how you stood up for me and for yourself. And sure, I may have had a couple glasses of champagne, but I'm sober enough to realize that these feelings are real. And that all the problems I've been causing for the last weeks were for nothing. He moved to lean against one of the desks, very clearly bewildered. She paused when he put his face in his hands and let out a sigh. No, keep going, he said with a smile when he came up for air. Chapter 10. Cal was having a hard time sorting through the emotions of the last hour. He'd won an award and had wanted to celebrate with Phaedra, but instead, the hustle and bustle of the night meant that somehow Sophia ended up all over him while she tried to sweet-talk potential customers. He'd erupted at her, having to defend his feelings for Phaedra. Which he didn't want to do, but felt like he had to after everything Sophia had said. And then, strangely enough, Phaedra had found him and pulled him into a classroom where she confessed that she'd heard everything and was so turned on that she wanted to have sex with him. Right then. In the classroom. Keep going, I'm fine. Say what you need to say, he stated. The money thing was a big issue for me, from the moment we met when you spent over $1,000 on Ruby. Honestly, it kind of turned me off. I'm not used to that kind of spending, and my ex used to spend a lot of money on me while he was cheating. Now, I know now that I was projecting my leftover feelings from that onto you, and that wasn't fair. But that was also why I was on edge when you mentioned sushi and town cars and this necklace. She reached up and touched the 3 diamonds. It wasn't right of me, I know you were just trying to show me that you cared. I was, but that's why I sent the cupcakes, because I also didn't understand until later what spending like that meant to you. I should have paid more attention at first, that was my fault. I don't think you need my money ever, but I want to know that you can have nice things, and let me give you a gift every now and then. But that can be it if you want. Sophia needed things when we were together. All the time, this purse, this car, this fancy dinner, and I didn't know how to get away from that. It's been so long since then. The room felt hot, so Calvin took off his jacket and loosened his tie. Phaedra bit her lip, but while he did so, but kept talking. I know. And the cupcakes were perfect. And I'm sorry about the Sophia thing and not trusting you. I didn't even take the time to just ask you about it. Instead, I made assumptions and let my mind wander, again equating you to my ex and thinking of you as some master manipulator. But I heard you tonight and I know the truth. And frankly, I'm sorry you have to put up with that awful woman as much as you do. Because I dealt with it for 3 days, and that was enough for me. Cal laughed. That was my fault too though. I should have been honest. Instead, I thought it would cause trouble to bring it up, so I just ignored it, which I shouldn't have done. But I hope it's handled now. Hopefully when we go back out there, we can show her that she didn't ruin us, like she'd like to. Exactly. Yes. The grin on her face started to grow. What? That's it, right? That's everything out in the open? I think so. Good. She moved from the table to the door where she flipped the lock on the door handle. Calvin's heartbeat quickened. She walked back to the table and used her arms to lift herself up and scoot back so that she fit squarely on the surface. That was so good, she said, coming up next to him and straightening her hair in the mirror he was using. He watched her primp and reapply the wine-colored lipstick she'd chosen. You're so beautiful, you know that? She looked down at him where he'd taken a seat at one of the desks. Thank you, that's sweet. No, I'm serious. I don't think you understand. You are really the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. It's more than just your body and your face which are perfect, but it's a lot of other things. Your eyes, your hands, phew, those hands. Your personality, I mean truly amazing. Funny, smart, the whole package. Like, how did I get so lucky? She walked over to him and sat down on his lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. You had a niece that loves pink, that's how. Without Ruby, we never would have met. Oh, I think we would have. When we both went to get tacos the next day, we would have met there. Except I would have thought you and Sophia were together and probably never would have talked to you. True, but we were bound to run into each other when we both opened our new locations only blocks away from each other. Right, Phaedra said. But that could have been 5 years from now, and we would have been really old. Nah, as long as it happened, it wouldn't matter how old we were. She smiled and kissed him. Should we get out of here? Actually, there's one more thing I need to do. You've got to trust me. Coming? She walked towards the door, unlocked it, and waited for him to catch up. You're going to keep me on my toes, aren't you? She nodded and led him out the door. The one more thing she had to do was going to be a big move, but she knew it was something she had control over and something that Cal would be over the moon to hear. She knew this would be the best way to show Cal that she was serious about forgetting the drama of the last couple of weeks and starting fresh. However, this big move would get to Sophia, and that was an added benefit. She considered just letting her one conversation with Cal be enough humiliation for the day, but the horrible things that Sophia had said floated around in her head. As a strong, independent woman, there was no rule about standing up for yourself except the obvious. You had to do it. Doing it by humiliating someone else was the more empowering but not the classiest option. A subtler, but slightly more effective option might be better. This was her choice. Okay, I have to run and do one thing. Then I say we have a drink and then get out of here, she said while wrapping her arms around his waist. What do you think? Sounds perfect. Where are you going? It's a secret. He squinted his eyes at her in concern but smiled, watching her walk away. Phaedra scanned the ballroom, searching for a couple of faces she recognized. Not finding the one she was looking for, she moved towards the back of the room, the tech booth. On her way back there, she drained an entire champagne flute for an additional boost of confidence. The booth was dark, and as she peeked through the small window in the door, she could only see a few white and red lights that illuminated one man's form. She knocked quietly, but then cracked open the door and slipped inside. It took her about half an hour to explain her situation to the man, convince him and the man in charge to make the announcement, and make her way back to Calvin. God, I was starting to get worried. What took so long? She found him pacing back and forth at the bar on the opposite wall of the ballroom. You can't rush things like this, just trust me, okay? His face still held a lot of concern. They ordered 2 more drinks and stood chatting quietly for a moment before the lights on the stage began to illuminate. The high-pitched squeal of the microphone feedback and the announcer from earlier walking on stage quieted the audience, and everyone turned to face him. I hope everyone is enjoying their night. Remember, the bar is open until midnight, so help yourselves, and there should still be food circulating as well. Now, as our night is coming to an end, I have an exciting announcement to make. Not the kind we usually make, but equally exciting. I think it goes to show how important these events are in bringing the best and hardest working companies to the front for the next year. And this announcement is a great example of that. I'd like to remind you of Mr. Calvin Dennison, the CEO of Queen's Media Group, given the award for Best New Media Group earlier tonight. Phaedra had pulled them closer to the stage, and after his name was called, the spotlights began to circle the crowd before closing in on the two of them. Calvin's face held a forced smile, but his eyes shifted back and forth, trying to get a better idea of what exactly was happening. What's going on? He whispered into Phaedra's ear. The start of something new, just listen, she said sweetly into his ear. He wrapped his hand around her waist, almost in a need of support, and squeezed. She reached out to counter him. It's a good thing. Tonight, 2 local businesses, based here in Atlanta, have expressed a written interest in contracting Queen's Group for their services. The first company is a previously well-known town car service, which has recently taken on a new, modern look and name, Above Ground, and is run by Mrs. Dwella Towns. Mrs. Towns states that she was moved by Mr. Dennison's speech, his desire to help connect people and not take advantage of his customers or the people they serve. She looks forward to working with him as they set themselves up to service all of Atlanta, not only with town car and taxi services, but also by providing applications that connect users with an easy means of analyzing their transportation options and picking the best for them. The man was reading off a sheet of paper until a slide popped up with the above-ground logo and a few statistics about the company. The man turned to Calvin and the crowd with a few more informal words. "This is an exciting opportunity, and we look forward to seeing what your companies do together." Phaedra looked over at Cal, who was staring up at the screen with a bewildered but excited look on his face. His smile was full of awe at what was happening in front of him, and Phaedra could easily imagine what he was thinking. She knew he didn't care about being the biggest or the most talked about company out there. But she knew he was willing to accommodate any potential customers that could recognize his vision and aligned it with theirs. That was the most valuable and immeasurable thing. Watching someone he didn't know and had never met, though he didn't know yet, Phaedra's involvement express a serious interest in working with him was amazing. It would tell him and everyone else in the room that he was clear about the vision and the purpose of his company, and word would spread. And although he didn't know it yet, Phaedra was convinced that his speech would attract some of the best and most honest companies to him, which would bring with it a lot of loyalty, something that was invaluable in his field. "Are you excited?" she yelled over the sound of clapping at one point. "Yes, that's crazy. I don't even know that company, and they don't know me. That's the exciting part. You made what you value and what you want to do within Atlanta obvious. The importance of what you can bring to the city. People relate to that." He leaned down and kissed her lightly, nodding but still looking a little bewildered. The man on the stage waited for the clapping to die down before continuing to speak. "And the contract with the second customer I mentioned will actually be announced by the store owner and media liaison herself. May I introduce Ms. Phaedra Witten, media liaison for Elite Boutique Atlanta." There was some faint clapping as Phaedra turned to wink at Calvin, but then quickly made her way on stage. She thanked the man as she arrived on stage, shaking his hand and taking her place behind the glass podium. She bent the microphone closer to her face and waited to speak until she'd locked eyes with Cal. "Wow, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I just wanted to take a second to thank you all for your contributions, but mostly to thank Calvin. I've had the pleasure of getting to know him on a personal level for the past few weeks. He stopped into our boutique to take his niece shopping. I was immediately drawn to him, his charisma and his polite charm. He just seemed like an amazing man. Traits that I know from my own experience are crucial in the field. But it wasn't until he showed me Queen's Media Group, told me of his plans to expand and the vision he had for Atlanta, well, that's when I knew I was in trouble." The crowd laughed in unison. "He is honest and hardworking. And when I had doubts or concerns, he went out of his way to make things clear. He's persistent but not pushy, and his company is a mirror image of his character. It's the kind of company that I want to work with. I've been lucky enough to be helping my own store branch out into a new location in South Atlanta, and my biggest hope for that store was to have more of a media presence. To find ways to attract more customers while simultaneously addressing needs within the community, and eventually catering to other demographics. Which I think is often the dream goal of most companies. So with that being said, I am offering the contract of media relations to Queen's Media Group, pending further discussion, and I'm looking forward to the future with Queen's and Calvin himself. Thank you." The man on stage helped her down as the crowd clapped and people began returning to the music and dancing. Phaedra reached Calvin and he pulled her in with no words, but a kiss. She held on to him for what felt like minutes. Chapter 11. "That was amazing," he said after pulling back and taking her all in. "How did you put that together? Did you do all of that?" She smiled and nodded. "I met Dwella earlier tonight. She told me all about the new image of her company and how she was looking to expand its media presence. I may have mentioned to her a little later that she should consider your company. She was impressed by your speech, and I think she likes me a lot, so that was a plus too." "Oh, definitely," he smiled. "And Candace, she's into it? She gave me full autonomy for the new store." She's even going to let me buy some shares in the company, so I will be part owner. Wow, that's amazing. Faye, I'm so proud of you and so thankful, I can't even explain it. None of that would have been possible without you. Oh yes, it would have. The whole building heard your speech and it was only a matter of days until people started contacting you with offers. I just helped it along. He shook his head. But it's not only that, you were the first person to tell me that my vision made sense. That it had meaning. So you gave me the courage to stand in front of everyone and basically preach it. No one else has done that for me, whether they just think the dream is bullshit or they can't actually understand what I'm proposing. Regardless, no one has supported me the way you have. And we've only known each other for a few weeks. Well, of course, you need to know that your ideas are valuable. Especially this one that you've been dreaming about for so long. He seemed to struggle to find words, but then he just kissed her again, pulled her in close, and began dancing along with some of the other couples in the room. Many people stopped to tap them on the shoulders to congratulate both of them or ask for contact information, so much so that Phaedra started to feel like royalty. It took 10 minutes for that feeling to wear off and be replaced by an anxious, but slightly excited feeling when she saw Sophia's enraged face come into her field of vision. What the hell was that? The words were spoken towards Calvin, but she stared directly at Phaedra. Please, Sophia, I think enough has been said for one day. Calvin's words didn't seem to register with her. Instead, she turned to fully address Phaedra. Phaedra grew excited but still very aware that they were in the middle of a dance floor and needed to remain as professional as possible given the circumstances. Honestly, who the hell do you think you are? To pretend like you know our company when you've known Calvin for like 5 days. It's absolutely embarrassing. Phaedra cut her off. Do you know what's embarrassing? Your desperation and the lack of common sense when it comes to Calvin and your company. You can't tell what's going on right in front of your eyes, which is sad. You browbeat the interns and you desperately seek out business with companies that don't align with your CEO's mission. He changes his mind all the time about what he wants and what will be good for the company. Half of the time he doesn't even know himself. Calvin stood back but didn't speak, almost as if he knew Phaedra wanted to work this out herself. Phaedra replied, No, you just don't take the time to listen. And the first few years, you probably convinced him into wanting what you wanted, when in reality, he just wanted to see his dream come to fruition. He doesn't care about the size or the money like you do. And not so surprisingly, people like that approach, hence the 2 job offers he just received. Without you, what could you possibly know about business? You're just a cashier at some random store. Whatever title you just gave yourself, media liaison, store manager, it's bullshit, and doesn't warrant you speaking in front of a group of people that are way above your station. Calvin stepped closer, but Phaedra stopped him. I don't have to explain myself to you. But you should know that Calvin and Queen's Media Group are going to play a big role in the development of our stores. So whether or not you like me, you're going to have to get used to seeing me both in a business aspect and by the fact that I'm dating your boss. Great, that's all we need is our CEO slumming it with some ghetto trash customer. Nice work, Calvin, we won't make it a year. Sophia was grabbing desperately, trying to find an insult that would stick. I'm not even going to stoop so low as to address that comment. But here's what I will say. Your sadness and desperation is keeping you from enjoying what's right in front of you. And seeing the amazing opportunities in front of your company. Cal and I may not be the same, but I can see what he sees, and that means something. I want what's best for Cal, and he wants what's best for me, it's that simple. Sophia had an incredulous look on her face, but didn't say anything. This time Calvin took a step forward to address her. She's right. In fact, I couldn't have said it better myself. Your rudeness and lack of being able to see what's important to me and the company has you blinded, and I can't let it continue. We can discuss it further in a more appropriate setting, but we will talk about your future at Queen's and whether or not there's a place for you there. Phaedra was only a little bit surprised over Calvin's reaction. She knew that Sophia was no longer good for his company and also knew that he wouldn't make any rash decisions without thinking it through a few more times. but just the mention of possibly firing her was enough to break Sophia down. And Phaedra found herself feeling guilty at the sight of the woman in front of her. "Calvin." She hissed the words through a choked throat. "Are you serious?" "I can't no, I'm not going anywhere." She didn't make it through the words before she turned and ran off. Calvin stood there staring after her, a sad look in his eyes. "She was wrong, everything she said was terrible, but yet I still feel bad," he said quietly. Phaedra gripped his hand tightly. "It's because you're a good man, and you'll always have a place for her in your heart." Phaedra was ready to call it a night and prepared to turn Cal towards the door when a set of pink sequins came into her field of view. "I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to introduce myself to Calvin." She reached out and pushed a tiny hand towards him. "Yes. Cal, this is Dwella, owner of Above Ground." His face lit up immediately at the sight of the woman and hearing who she was. "Oh wow, Mrs. Towns, it's great to finally meet you. Ms. Whitten was telling me all about you. I can't thank you enough for expressing interest in our company. We'll set up a meeting to discuss the particulars." The elderly woman was still holding his hand. "Of course. I was so thrilled to hear your speech, and you look like such a nice young man to work with." Calvin laughed. "I'm not that young, ma'am." "You are compared to me," she laughed. "But that's what I'm looking for my company. I need a new fresh look and young people to push me. I've got to clean out the cobwebs my late husband had been growing for the last years." "Ah, I see. Well, yes, we can definitely help you with that. I'm excited and look forward to working with you." They exchanged goodbyes, and Calvin and Phaedra watched as the woman walked away. "Things are looking up," Phaedra said with a smile. "They're going to look a lot better when I get you home tonight." He winked and grabbed Phaedra, leading her towards the coat area to collect their belongings. It was a quiet and comfortable ride to Calvin's condo. They rode in the back seat, Phaedra's head on his chest and arms wrapped around him. They didn't say any words until they were inside his apartment. The buzz of champagne and dancing and the overall bizarreness but amazingness of the night had worn off, and Phaedra wanted to make sure they were both on the same page. "So, we're going to do this? This relationship thing. Right? You mean, is it official?" She rolled her eyes at the use of the childish term. "Sure, yes." "Are we?" "Yes, Phaedra. We're business partners and life partners for the foreseeable future. We've got a lot to learn about each other, but it's totally worth it to me as long as it is to you." "It is," she insisted, sitting down next to him on the couch. "It is. You helped me see that all of these things I worried about, they were left over from a time and a relationship with someone who didn't treat me well. And because of that, I almost stopped myself from being happy in a healthy relationship. I was so distracted by all that I couldn't see how much you truly cared about me. I saw Sophia as a threat and let her get to me even when you made it clear that you didn't care about her. And the few times I was unsure, I could have made it so much easier on both of us if I had just asked you. But now I know. Now I'm not scared to be open and honest with you and communicate the way we need to. I'm not saying we have it all figured out already, but I think we're in a good place to throw the last 3 weeks out, except the fun stuff, and start over. I don't really want to throw out what just happened back there in that classroom, though. Is that okay? Can I keep that one?" Cal asked with a laugh. Phaedra smiled and nodded. "Let's just throw out a couple of bad things and dramatic moments and keep the rest." "Sounds like a plan." He pulled her in close to his chest and they lay like that for a while. Phaedra woke up in Cal's bed to the sound of the news quietly playing in the background. She had nowhere to be on that Saturday, and she was sure Candace wasn't expecting her at the shop. She could tell without opening her eyes that Calvin wasn't in the bed next to her because the wind from his fan blew directly onto her. During the night she'd stayed there, she had noticed that his body had a tendency to block the movement of the air, and because of that he would get cold and wrap his arms around her to get warm, a feeling she was unlikely to forget anytime soon. Because he wasn't there next to her, she took her time opening her eyes, and for a second she let herself revel in the peace that surrounded her. Sure, All of the problems they'd in the previous days still existed. Sophia still worked at Queen's for the time being, Calvin still lived in an extravagant apartment and drove a very expensive car, and they were still an interracial couple trying to start a relationship in a time where hate was still alive and well. But somehow she still felt at peace, even recognizing all of those things. This morning each was just a challenge, a small roadblock for her and Cal, to approach together and grow even closer through overcoming it. That thought shot her eyes open. The room was filled with warm light and her naked body was warmed in the few places that touched it. Another feeling she was unlikely to forget. She took a few more minutes to sit up and dug through the nearest drawer, where she found a soft t-shirt waiting for her to put on. She pulled on her panties, that she found across the room, underneath the shirt which landed below her thighs. Her black wavy hair was still pulled back, and she took a minute in the mirror by the door to smooth the flyaways that had made their home there overnight. She smiled at how she looked in his t-shirt and walked out of his bedroom. She found him shirtless on the couch, the TV on in front of him, but looking down at the iPad that sat on his lap. "Good morning," he said as he looked up and saw her approaching. He chewed his lip for a second when she walked in front of him, and her dark, toned legs could be seen under his too large shirt. "Jesus, I gotta be the luckiest man on earth." She rolled her eyes jokingly and collapsed next to him, running her hands over the soft blonde hairs on his chest. "You are, for sure." He tried to tickle her in protest, but she wriggled out of his grasp. "You want to see something cool?" he asked. "Sure," she replied, returning to her position and directing her attention to the iPad that lay on his lap. He scrolled through a couple of pages, before landing on a Huffington Post article, and the title stood out to her. CEO of Best New Media Group 2018 lands 2 contracts with Above Ground and Elite Boutique Atlanta, humbling the crowd with his vision for his company and his city. "Whoa, wait, let me see that." She grabbed the iPad from him and scrolled through the article. She read some of it aloud. CEO, Calvin Dennison's speech after receiving Best New Media Group on behalf of his company Queen's Media. He talked about how his vision had shifted from wanting fame and fortune, to wanting to be an honest and loyal company. He expressed his hope to unite customers and their patrons around Atlanta by offering the most straightforward and user-friendly products they could. "Cal, this is great. Keep reading," he said with a smile on his face. Dwella Towns, the now CEO of Above Ground, a modernized version of Taxico ATL, expressed her desire to work with Mr. Dennison's company in the future. Following this announcement, Ms. Phaedra Whitten took the stage to give a public declaration of Mr. Dennison's passion for his company and genuine character as a businessman. She explained her recent meeting with Mr. Dennison and subsequent conversations about his company and their future. Ms. Whitten herself was in the market for a media group to handle the opening of a satellite store for Elite Boutique, a children's clothing store downtown. The words spoken by both Mr. Dennison and Ms. Whitten reminded everyone in the room that business can be more meaningful than it seems, and with the power of communicating with the public comes the responsibility to do it intelligently and with a kind heart. Expect to hear great things from Queen's Media Group in the coming months. We'll keep you updated here at Huffington Post. She continued to stare, focusing now on the picture of the two of them smiling up at the stage. Her arm wrapped delicately around his and both of their faces in awe and amazement. She continued to scroll towards the bottom of the article where she saw the comments section. "Don't do that," came a more serious instruction from Cal. She looked over at him with a puzzled look on her face. "Why?" He took the iPad from her and clicked the button on the screen to turn it off. "I made that mistake already, and I only got through the first few comments. Just let me save you from this. It wasn't terrible, some things that were said were nice, but just trust me on this." It took Phaedra a moment to realize what he was saying. "Like, racial comments?" "Some." "Look at me." He pulled her close and looked into her eyes with a very serious, but sweet look on his face. "We knew this was going to happen, that it was a possibility with the time and place that we live. But I don't want it to define us, and if we keep reading it will start to. We have to define ourselves. We know that it's not going to be easy, but I want to do it regardless." Phaedra gave herself a few moments to think about what he was doing for her. He was taking the brunt of a very possibly painful experience, and he was doing it to protect her. Weeks ago she would have thought that was controlling and not his place, but now that she knew him and knew his heart, she knew that it would be what was best for both of them. Okay. Thank you for that. I never would have stopped reading once I started. I do know that, but you don't have to thank me. I'll spend as long as I can trying to make you happy. Whatever that entails. She smiled and kissed him lightly, breathing him in. Oh, but you know what? A couple of people said you were the most beautiful woman they'd ever seen. Which I can agree with, so, like I said, not all bad. She laughed. What did they say about you? Ah, handsome, strapping, charismatic, the usual. Oh yeah, I bet. She roared with laughter. No wonder you didn't want me reading the comments. They spent the next hour preparing a breakfast of bacon, eggs, and biscuits, which Calvin insisted he cook himself. So, as your client and new business partner, what's first on our to-do list? She asked, sliding a piece of bacon in her mouth. Great question. First, we'll need to sign a contract where you'll express your love and gratitude for me, and then you'll describe all your hopes and dreams, and I will then set about fulfilling them. Seems easy enough. He laughed. But actually we do have a lot to get done. You've got the place picked out, so now we just need a time frame and budget, and we'll handle the rest. Phaedra couldn't help but grin from ear to ear, realizing that her dream of owning and running her own store was about to become a reality. She had the store picked out and the budget planned, even the grand opening selection of new items. She was ready. And now that she'd decided to bring Queen's Media Group into the planning, she was even more confident that they would have a successful opening and an even more promising future. And there are no rules about dating your clients? Phaedra asked, again jokingly. If there were, I would have gotten rid of them by now, he winked. And you'd never know they existed. But really, I tried putting one into place when Sophia and I broke up, but half the interns were dating each other and some of the smaller clients, which at the time was some of our best business. So that never worked. Okay, she clearly already knew the answer to that, but liked to watch him answer. We're going to be all right, you know that? Better than all right. In fact, we're going to change the game and we're going to do it together. Yes, we are, she said with a wink. Chapter 12. There were hundreds of people lined up on the sidewalk outside of the new elite boutique store. The location was 1 block over from Cal's office, and Phaedra had spent the past 4 weeks in and out of both her and his businesses. Cal's company and Elite Boutique had signed the contract, making Queen's Media Group the sole designer of all things media-related for Elite Boutique. Queen's had helped design an app for the store, had planned events, and used their expertise to place marketing campaigns strategically around the city. They'd done such an amazing job advertising for the new store that in the weeks before its opening the original store had seen almost a 2-fold increase in revenue. Candace had been elated but stressed. Given that Phaedra wasn't around, she'd had to hire 2 new employees to help stay on top of the high demand for products and in-store sales. But that in itself was enough to tell Phaedra they'd made the right choice. That morning, Queen's had scheduled the grand opening for Elite Boutique South Atlanta. Flyers and online events were posted to advertise for the event. Even Queen's staff was brought in to help with the influx of traffic to their online store, which was opening at the same time for those that couldn't or didn't want to travel to the store. At 6:45 a.m. Cal saw Phaedra peeking out the window that overlooked the street and had a great view of the line that was building rapidly outside of the store. "You all right?" he asked. Her breathing was heavy, and she continued to wring her hands in nervousness. "Hey, it's going to be fine. What if we run out of merchandise, like too soon? I wasn't expecting 200 people. And what if the online store crashed like Obamacare did? How horrifying. I'm going to look so unprofessional." She wasn't talking directly to him, and he started to think she was more likely just airing out all of her concerns. "First of all, my guys handled the online store, so just trust me that they'll take care of it. They're over there right now preparing for anything as we speak. And yeah, you're going to run out of merchandise, but we planned for that too. We're only letting so many customers into the building at once so that we can make sure they have a good experience, but also keep an eye on merchandise levels compared to the line outside. We can call it whenever we want, and we have 20% off coupons for everyone that doesn't make it into the store. Not to mention we wrote on all of the flyers and posts that this would be a limited time event, and whenever we ran out, we ran out. We thought about all that, remember? Phaedra must remember because the two of them, as well as their teams, had spent hours thinking about everything that could go wrong and planning for it ahead of time. It had ended up being an amazing experience, working with her. After the gala, he'd quickly and promptly handled the Sophia situation. Her behavior in the name of Queen's Media had been inappropriate and malicious, which was how he'd worded the request for a letter of resignation he handed her the Monday after the gala. It hadn't been easy for him to let her go, because of all the history that the two had both had with each other and with the company. But he knew for both himself and the company to grow, she couldn't be a part of it. And with Sophia gone, Phaedra had made herself at home in his life and within the walls of the company. He had let her have an intimate role in the planning of her own project, which wasn't typically necessary, but made for a better final product and a much more enjoyable journey. Phaedra had sold her grandmother's house. And while Cal had mentioned the possibility of her moving in with him, she had politely declined for no reason other than that she wanted to experience their relationship from a safe and separate space until the right time. Her new apartment was only minutes away from his, and she found herself still spending a lot of time at his place. She loved where their relationship was, it was in the perfect place and was moving at just the right speed. With Sophia gone and all the feelings out on the table, the two of them could truly be themselves. And as they got to know each other, it became that much easier to work together, turning the grand opening into the most amazing day and exactly what Phaedra had imagined. Sometimes she felt like he could read her mind, or sense what she would worry about before even she did. And though she was nervous about the opening, having Cal standing behind her and reminding her of all the work they'd put into making it the best day, she knew she'd be just fine. After gathering herself for a moment and glancing at the clock, which read 6:52 a.m., she turned around to face him. "Cal, thank you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. Everything looks so great, and I can already tell this turnout is amazing, and I won't even know the online numbers for a while. I mean, what you've already done for the other store is more than enough. How can I ever thank you?" He laughed. "You don't have to, and that's the best part of us being together. This is hardly anything compared to what you did for me at the gala with Above Ground and everyone there." Above Ground had revolutionized Queen's Media Group. After Cal had the chance to meet with Dwella, they'd signed an official contract, and Cal had gotten straight to work building a group of his employees that he was confident would be able to build the best product for them. And in doing so, the Queen's logo and phone number was plastered all around Atlanta on every Above Ground town car, every page on the app. They'd received dozens of inquiries, mostly from small self-employed businesses that wanted to jumpstart their media presence. Cal quickly realized how much he loved working with these small companies. It was the perfect setup where a small store or company could contact them, and within days have a product in their hands. It was a quick turnaround, but it also meant that lots of people were hearing about Queen's Media. They began offering a small business package, promising 2-week output, and guaranteeing a certain percentage increase in traffic. It was Calvin's dream, and Phaedra was proud of having played a big role in making it a reality. "So, we're indebted to each other forever?" Phaedra asked jokingly. "Not forever, right now we're business partners and two people in love with each other. But truthfully, I think we lucked out. We found each other when we needed it the most. I needed someone to remind me why I was doing what I was doing, the importance of it. And you needed someone to get you out of your comfort zone and challenge you. But yes, we may always be indebted to each other for that reason. But I'm okay with that." He smiled and kissed her. "Me too," she replied. Cal knew they had a long road ahead of them. An interracial romance in the middle of two growing companies was already making its way through the media outlets. Not all of it was bad, but some of it was. Lucky for the two of them, they'd figured out a lot of their problems early on. Cal knew how she felt about money. He knew to pamper her periodically, but not to spoil her. That in itself was empowering to him, to be with a woman that was so secure in herself and her job that she didn't need to be spoiled by him or even be with him every minute. It was exactly what he wanted, and he knew she felt the same. "I think it's time," Calvin said. They both turned to the clock, which read 6:59 a.m. "Ready?" "Let's do it," she said after a while. She let him follow her to the front door where she pushed it open and walked out onto the sidewalk. She didn't have a megaphone, so instead cleared her throat and began to speak as loudly as she could without sounding strained. "Good morning, everyone. I am so happy to welcome everyone to our new store here in South Atlanta. This turnout is amazing. It's more than I could have asked for, and all the credit goes to Queen's Media Group, of course. I want to thank you all for coming. I know it's early, but there's no time like the present to go shopping. We're going to try to go in groups so that you have space and the time to check out the store. Of course, first come first serve, but in the event that we run out of merchandise, we have coupons for the rest of you. Let's get started." Candace and the other employees had come to the new store to help with the craziness. Calvin watched the influx of bodies pouring into the store as they propped the doors open. Phaedra was busy frantically running around the store helping the customers, so Cal kissed her and excused himself to the back room to call over to Queen's and check the online side of things. He settled in front of the computer he'd set up himself and logged into his primary user account for the Elite Boutique online site. From his account, he could see the list of IP addresses and their locations. Not surprisingly, there were people accessing Phaedra's online site from everywhere in the country and even a few places internationally. The small black and green map in the corner was lit up. He also could see the inventory list update every 10 seconds, showing how much merchandise was being purchased and how much was left. Based on the amount of attention Elite Boutique was getting on social media, Cal had suggested Candace approve a 200% increase in the amount of material they were prepared to stock. Hesitantly she had agreed, and Cal was glad he'd asked her for that as he watched the numbers of available merchandise fall immediately. For a second he was proud of himself and his team, but then he realized that it was Phaedra who'd done the most work. Because of her he was able to do what needed to be done. She'd been the one to land him the above-ground account, which had launched his vision into a legitimate and accepted idea within the community. It was because of her that he even felt motivated to do his job. The month that they were able to spend together working on the project was the best month he'd experienced in years. Every child's shirt or sparkly headband that sold in front of his eyes was a reminder of what the two were capable of together. He was proud of her comeback, not only after her ex had cheated on her and broken her down, but her ability to accept someone else into her life after that. He was lucky. A lot of women would have needed more than the time it took her to get over someone they'd been with for so long. He was amazed at his own luck, that he'd taken Ruby into the store that day. He hadn't wanted to, he was stressed and overworked, and when his sister had called to tell him she was on his side of town he'd almost ignored the call. But something told him to answer it. Something told him to pack up earlier than he typically would have and go spend time with the two of them. He hadn't planned to spend $1,000 on the little one, but he didn't mind at all. And when he'd seen Phaedra that day, he figured he could spend every day writing checks to Elite Boutique if that meant getting to watch her laugh at his jokes. Instead, he didn't have to write any more checks, and technically Elite Boutique was writing him checks. Thought the two of them never talked about that. He was amazed at what they'd done together, and his heart flipped at thoughts of the future. Around 8:30 a.m., Phaedra joined him in the back room. He turned his chair to face her and held a huge grin on his face. She started speaking before she saw him. "Geez, it's crazy out there. We're selling out of everything. So I don't know, maybe an hour left at most. But we're getting through the line outside, so I'm feeling a little better about that." After a moment she looked over at him and stopped short. What are you smiling about?" she asked. "It's gone." "What's gone?" came the horrified look. She leaned behind him to take a look at the screen. It was their website, and the large red words read "Sold out to restock by the end of the week." Phaedra's eyes widened and she grabbed the mouse, clearly not registering what had happened. She, too, had expressed concern that maybe they'd planned for too many sales and they wouldn't reach their goal. But Calvin and Queen's Media Group had guaranteed that it was for the best. "Wait, it's gone. All of it." "Cal, that was a week's worth of merchandise, how is it gone?" she asked, dumbfounded, still looking at the screen and not at him. He pulled her towards him. "It's gone because you have a great product, and we worked really hard to draw people in and make a relatable campaign. You did this." "No, babe. We did this, together. And this is just the start of the amazing things we're going to do together." She shivered at his words, goosebumps crawling up her arms. "Promise?" she asked. "I promise." It didn't take long for Elite Boutique to rise up in the ranks of children's clothing, especially with the quality of their products and the ease of using their online store. Every person that visited their website could also read the story of how the South Atlanta Elite Boutique store came to be. It featured the Huffington Post article, the first of many to follow, and showed pictures of Candace and Phaedra and both of the women with Calvin and the Queen's Media team. There were pictures of the groups hanging out and enjoying a beer, and pictures of them doing community service or special sales that benefited a cause around the city. Both Calvin and Phaedra's dreams had become a reality. And just like their work, so different but able to come together for an amazing outcome. That's how Phaedra saw both her and Calvin. They were from two different worlds and had very different pasts, but the differences were what brought them together. They were forced to learn about each other and adjust their own wants and needs for the other person. In addition, and most importantly, they had to learn to live in the present. They had to forget about the painful relationships in their past, and instead use what they had learned to make better decisions with each other. But they also had to remain in the present as much as they could. While they planned for the future, they tried to remember the now. The two constantly fought stares and judgment about being together, and only when they were able to ignore it could they truly enjoy themselves. When asked about it, Calvin would respond the same way every time while holding on to Phaedra's hand and kissing her cheek. "Our hopes and desires for our business is the passion we have to unite people and provide a service unmatched by anyone else. Well, we live that every day by being together. We are very different people who have taken two very different journeys, but that's what brings us together. We serve each other daily, as selflessly as we can, and we support each other. And that shouldn't be interesting at all, that should be the way every relationship is, regardless of class or color." Every time he gave his answer, Phaedra would gaze at him, still in awe of their relationship and what the two had built together, and what they would continue to build in the future. The end.